We are introduced to Mimori Toka, a kid who has less personality as a bag of rocks. He has accustomed himself to a life of isolation due to his traumatic upbringing and abusive parents, so now he impulsively tries to fade into the background and avoid trouble. Right now, the class president, Sogu, is getting messed with by the class jerk Oyamada, who has stolen her book for no reason, and no one really cares enough to help her, especially not the teacher who clearly hates his job. Since no one is stepping up to save Sogu, Mimori decides to take action for once and gets up from his seat to ask Oyamada to return Sogu's book. Oyamada is surprised that a nobody like Mimori would dare stand up to him. However, just as he is about to start messing with Mimori as well, the class Chad Takutu speaks up and tells Oyamada to quiet down. Oyamada tries to appeal to Takutu and says he wants to teach Mimori his place as a background character, but Takutu doesn't intend to let that happen. To be clear, he doesn't care about Mimori at all, or Sogu for that matter. He just doesn't want Oyamada to cause any more trouble because it's annoying to listen to. Oyamada doesn't like it, but since Takutu is the alpha, he has no choice but to listen to him and settle down. Oyamada returns Sogu's book and sits back down, but since he needs to keep himself entertained, he quietly starts kicking the kid across from him, Yasu. The teacher finally speaks up and tells Oyamada to quit messing with Yasu. Things get quiet on the bus after that, but then all the students are suddenly transported into a room where they are greeted by the goddess Vicious. She explains that her kingdom, Alien, summons brave warriors to have them fight the evil demon emperor every time he appears. The last time the demon emperor showed up was 200 years ago, and he was thankfully defeated by the valiant efforts of the previous heroes. However, the great emperor has been revived once more, so Alien has summoned the students to be the next heroes of the kingdom of Alien. The students are still greatly confused by everything that has happened so far, so they think this entire thing is either a prank or maybe they all died in a bus crash. The teacher gets everyone's attention and tells them that he's not sure what's going on either, but for now, they should all just listen to Vicious. Vicious thanks him, thinking he understands what she has been saying, but in reality, he is just blinded by Booba. Perverted teacher aside, Mimori takes a moment to assess the situation. This building doesn't seem like anything he has ever seen before. There's a goddess standing in front of him, and he doesn't feel like he's in a dream, so there's only one conclusion to be made. They have actually been summoned to another world. Takundo clarifies that the goddess wants them to defeat this so-called demon emperor, but he wants to know what happens if they refuse to cooperate. The goddess tells them that she unfortunately does not have the power to send them home if they don't want to become Alien's heroes, but there is still a way for them to go back to Earth. It involves a reverse summoning ritual which requires an evil element, and the only way to acquire this evil element is to get it from the heart of the demon emperor, or to absorb the element as it is released upon the death of the demon emperor. Oyamada still doesn't see a reason why any of them should put their lives on the line to fight this demon emperor when Vicious essentially kidnapped them. So Vicious does the only thing she can and begs them to reconsider being this world's saviors. Sobu speaks up to introduces herself as the class president, and even if Vicious refers to them as saviors, they are still just high school students, so they wouldn't be of much use if they were sent into war. Vicious tells her that there's no need to worry about that since they have been bestowed with powers that no other human being in this world has. They all find this hard to believe, so Vicious decides to give them a little demonstration to prove that special abilities truly exist. She calls for a prisoner to be brought out, and then a demonic beast which proceeds to eat the prisoner. And after the demon has mercilessly mauled the prisoner, Vicious casts a fireball to incinerate it. That should have sufficiently traumatized the students so they can accept that they are in a new world. And now that they've come to believe what she has been saying, Vicious directs their attention to a crystal ball which will be used to evaluate their abilities. One by one, the students step up to have their abilities evaluated, and they all seem to have decent aptitude. Notably, when Oyamada goes up to the crystal ball, it glows a brilliant red color, meaning he is incredibly powerful by this world's standards. Next up is Takuto, and when he puts his hand on the crystal, it completely shatters. Everyone is shocked and confused by what's just happened, so the goddess explains this means Takuto is S rank. S rank is the top of the line when it comes to power and leaves above everyone else, so having a single S rank hero is already really lucky. But as the aptitude test continues, it is revealed that Sogu is also S rank as she shatters the backup orb they brought in. And it doesn't end there either, as there is a third S rank hero who shatters the second backup orb in storage. Vicious is in disbelief at how wonderful the hero roster is turning out to be, so she asks who the next person is going to be. And that person turns out to be Mimori. He puts his hand on the crystal, and it begins to glow purple, but the light emanating from the orb is much weaker than it was with the others, so he asks Vicious what his rank is. However, she completely ignores him and asks for the next person to come up. Mimori is used to getting ignored, so he just rolls with it and moves on, But then he notices that the last person to be examined was Yusa, and the orb shows a dark mass in the center, which means he is the dark hero of the group. And as far as their records show, the dark hero is often far more powerful than any other heroes in the group. So essentially, everyone needs to be careful because the quiet kid just got his gun. After that, the goddess gave everyone instructions on how to check their statuses, and when Miyamori takes a look at his stats, he realizes that his stats kinda suck. The goddess created this window so that the heroes could get accurate information about their abilities wherever they want, so Miyamori looks a little closer and notices something called an inherent skill. Inherent skills are skills that are unique to any given hero, and they can typically be used immediately, but some may need to be awakened at a higher level. But that's enough explanations for now, as Vicious tells everyone that they will now be performing a very necessary ritual for their success. She calls Miyamori forward and explains that he is E rank, and as the record books show, the lowest ranked heroes always did nothing but slow down the more powerful ones, therefore she's making the executive decision to dispose of him. However, killing a hero just for being weak would be too morally ambiguous for her, so she decided to give Miyamori a chance to earn his life back. Instead of outright killing him, she will send him to some ruins, and if he manages to survive, then he can live as he pleases in the world. Miyamori asks if these ruins are dangerous, and Vicious answers that of course the ruins are dangerous, it wouldn't be much of an execution grounds if it were safe. Miyamori tries to talk his way out of this and says he has an inherent skill of abnormal status endowment, so that must be useful to the team somehow, but to his dismay, the goddess tells him that abnormal status spells and skills in this world are totally useless, since they almost never actually work as intended, and even when they do work, they aren't very useful anyway. Miyamori tries to appeal to the goddess's morality and says she can't just dispose of him when she is the one who summoned him here without his consent, but her name is literally Vicious, so I don't think she cares. As Miyamori is trying to come to terms with his fate, Yasu touches his shoulder, and Miyamori thinks Yasu is going to stand up for him since he used to help him out back when he was getting bullied on Earth. However, now that he has power, Yasu has turned into just as much of a jerk as the others, so he mocks Miyamori for being weak and condemns him to his terrible fate. By now, Miyamori has realized that no one cares about him being disposed of here, and all the other students just want him gone. So he stands to accept his fate as Vicious throws him a magic bag as a consolation gift. However, there's at least one person there who knows this isn't right, as Sobu steps up and asks Vicious to reconsider the disposal of Miyamori. However, Vicious is dead set on disposing of Miyamori, so she just knocks Sogu out so she can't complain about it. Miyamori can't stand the cruelty and mockery any longer, so he attempts to use his abnormal status effect skill to paralyze the goddess. But unfortunately, as a goddess, she always has an anti-abnormal status shield which she hasn't used since the Heian era. She mocks Miyamori for failing his attack, and without further delay, she wants everyone to witness as this loser is teleported to his doom. Just then, Takudu fires off a blast, which leaves a huge hole in the wall. But as the goddess looks over to him, he clarifies that he isn't trying to save Miyamori or anything. He just wanted to test out his powers and didn't realize it would do that much damage. Some of Miyamori's classmates derive joy in watching him be disposed of, while others remain indifferent, and the one person who supported him was knocked out. So as he is about to be teleported, Miyamori gives up on his background character act and gives Vicious the middle finger, vowing to make her regret this someday. Miyamori wakes up in the abandoned ruins and tries to open his status screen, but his system tells him that he is unable to do so because of the low level of light in the area. That's when he remembers the bag he got, so after pouring a little mana into it, it generates enough light for him to see again. However, as he is walking around, he stumbles across a human skeleton on the ground, and whatever killed the skeleton is still in the ruins, so Miyamori is on edge now. He ends up tripping over some rocks, and it's a good thing he did because that allowed him to narrowly evade a sneak attack from a terrifying monster. He has no time to think or worry about where he's running to because if he stops for even a moment, he will be killed. As he continues to run, Miyamori ends up tripping over a rock, and as the monster closes in on him, the emotion he is feeling isn't fear, but rather frustration. Frustration at the fact that he was abandoned by all those jerks and is doomed to die because of it. He has no weapons to fight back with, and no useful skills to use since his abnormal status effects are apparently unlikely to work. However, that doesn't mean he's not going to try and use whatever he can to survive, so Miyamori casts Paralyze on the monster, and to his astonishment, it actually works. He doesn't want to stick around to figure out why though, so he runs away again. As he does this, he thinks to himself that the paralysis must have been a one-time fluke since Vicious said abnormal status effects have a low success rate, but in his haste to escape, Miyamori ends up running into another monster which looks like a cross between a chicken and a roach. Whatever it is going to kill him if he doesn't do something quickly, so Mimori raises his hand and casts Paralyze again, fully expecting it to fail, but miraculously, it works again. Once could be a fluke, but 2 times in a row means his effect's success rate is way higher than what the goddess had claimed. It's possible that Mimori's status effects are different from the weak ones that are native to this world, but even if he can defend himself with his spells, it will do him no good if he ends up running out of mana to use it. He only has 1 mana point left, so he uses it to cast poison on the monster, and once he does this, the monster begins to slowly die. In addition to having a high success rate, Mimori's spells also have a really long duration, so he can just sit back and wait for the monster to die. He officially has 0 mana points left, so he doesn't know what will happen if he tries to use his status effects again. However, he doesn't get much time to recover as the first monster has caught up to him. The paralysis effect he cast earlier must have worn off, but even if he has no mana left, no one will come to save him, so Mimori is prepared to fight for his survival. He attempts to use Paralyze on the Minotaur again, but this time the skill fails to activate, so Mimori has to jump out of the way. He is informed by the system that he is not allowed to cast the same effect multiple times on a single target, so he comes up with a new plan and casts Sleep on the Minotaur, causing it to fall to the ground unconscious, and once the monster is out cold, Mimori applies poison to it as well. It looks like there are no restrictions on stacking effects, but he is out of mana, so if he keeps using his skills, he will eventually burn through his stamina as well, and there are still a lot more monsters for him to deal with. Mimori begins spamming paralysis, and eventually he has managed to stop all the monsters, but has left him on the verge of collapse. However, his troubles aren't over yet as even more monsters begin to approach, so he has no choice but to keep using Paralyze until his body can't take it anymore, and it's not long before he reaches his limit and can't go on. There are still a lot of monsters around him, but he knows if he tries to use his skill even one more time, it could mean the end of him. He has no other options available, but luckily, just as he is about to use up the last of his body's stamina, the cockatrice that he poisoned a while ago suddenly dies, and due to this, Mimori's level shoots up until he is at level 258 and both his mana and stamina are replenished. Mimori doesn't understand what happened at first, but then he notices the dead monster and realizes that he must have gotten experience because his poison killed that one, and with his energy replenished, he can keep fighting as much as necessary. As he continues to spam paralysis, his skill levels up, leading him to believe he can upgrade it by repeated use, but he will worry about that later since for now, he has to make sure he can escape this place alive. With his paralysis now being level 2, Mimori notices that he now has the option to select multiple targets at once, so he does so, and the monsters are all immediately frozen in place. So far, his status effects have had a 100% success rate, so Vicious is probably the only person in this world that his skill has no effect on. He begins inflicting poison on all the paralyzed monsters, and eventually his poison skill levels up as well, but there are still a lot more monsters here. So that means he can level up even more. Mimori takes a look at his status window, and since he leveled up, his stats are far higher than they were when he first got here, especially his mana, which is now over 8,000, and mana is his only way of surviving this hellhole. Mimori takes a break and sits down while he waits for the poison to do its thing, and eventually, the monsters begin dying one by one, raising Mimori's level even further. By the time he is level 500, Mimori is fairly confident that he can now make it out of the ruins, so he prepares to take care of the remaining monsters. However, after seeing Mimori kill dozens of them with ease, the monsters have enough common sense to know that they shouldn't mess with him, so they all run off. Now that the area is safe, Mimori sifts through the piles of rotting bones in order to find any loot that he could use, and after getting his hands on a cloak and a blade, he sets off to escape the ruins. As he looks for the exit, he comes across many different monsters, but he has realized that he faces another problem. He has no food, so he's going to starve soon if he doesn't get something to eat. He is so desperate that he is even willing to eat monster meat, so after retracing his steps, he returns to the monster corpses and reluctantly begins carving into them to eat what he can. However, as the eyeball pops out and Mimori tries to eat it, he realizes that the monster's entire body has acid in it, so he won't be able to eat it after all. With no source of food, Mimori believes he will starve to death before he ever makes it out of here. He has no energy left in his body, but then he notices the color of his magic bag changing, and since that's the only source of light he has, he frantically rushes over to supply it with more mana. However, as he does so, he feels something appear inside the bag, and to his delight, he finds a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of soda. He excitedly begins eating, while this means his hunger problem is solved for now. He doesn't know for sure if he will be able to get the bag to produce food again. As days continue to pass inside the ruins, Mimori has gotten used to committing mass monster genocide with his skills, but he is worried that he might be losing his humanity because of this. Back on Earth after suffering abuse at the hands of his stepfather, Mimori was on the verge of having his murderous villain arc right then and there, but before he could lose his sense of humanity, he was rescued by his aunt and uncle who took him in and gave him a sense of normalcy. He learned empathy from them, and he thought he had become a normal person like them, but right now, as he is staring at the mountain of corpses beneath his feet, he feels nothing at all. There's no going back to how he was before, so Mimori just accepts that he's a psychopath now and moves on. As he goes, he comes across another section of the ruins with a floating eyeball monster, but Mimori just takes it out with his poison. As he moves forward, he comes across a door with a magic lock, and upon opening it, he finds a small room with 2 skeletons inside. He assumes they must have been people that were disposed of by Vicious as well, but they weren't fortunate enough to make it out alive. He searches through their things and finds a pouch full of gems, so while he feels bad about stealing from the dead, the gems could be valuable and he could use them once he gets out of here, so he no longer feels bad about it. He goes through the other rooms nearby as well, and eventually he comes across one that takes a large amount of mana to open. But once he finally unlocks it, he finds a skeleton sitting with a note next to it. The note says that the skeleton was once a man known as Anglin the Great Sage, and he was the former hero of darkness. The same one Vicious had mentioned was the strongest of them all. According to Anglin's note, Vicious sent him here by force after she no longer has a need for him as a hero, and while he was powerful enough to make it this far, he clearly couldn't escape, so he left a message to help the next person who could manage to make it this far. Vicious may have said the Demon Lord was evil, but she is just as bad in Mimori's eye. Although we can't say he is much better than her either, since his only goal is to get revenge on her, and he doesn't care if he has to destroy the world to do it. As he is looting Anglin's corpse, he comes across a book of forbidden arts, and it is full of information about recipes for medicine and magic tool instructions that could prove to be useful later, so he decides to keep it. He also finds a scroll of forbidden magic, but he doesn't understand what it says. However, if a great sage like Anglin went through all the trouble of keeping it hidden with him up until his final moments, then it must be really powerful, and it may even be strong enough for Mimori to eventually defeat the goddess if he is ever able to decipher it. Mimori is just about ready to leave, but before he goes, he steals Anglin's cloak because it's cooler than his old one, and takes a look at Anglin's book again. But this time he sees a bloody warning telling him to beware of the Soul Eater. And the ominous warning has Mimori wondering if the Soul Eater is the one who killed Anglin. Mimori continues making his way through the ruins until he comes across a door that he thinks will lead to the surface. However, if this is truly the final door, then that must mean the Soul Eater Anglin was talking about is here as well. Mimori remains cautious of his surroundings and takes a look at his stats to make sure he is prepared for this. He did all he could to ensure he leveled up as much as possible before he got here, so he can only hope that his skills are enough to defeat it. Mimori eventually finds a creepy face and he is certain that this must be the Soul Eater, so he immediately attempted to use Paralyze on it. But the second he steps out of cover, the Soul Eater fires a laser into his hand. This is the first time anything has managed to stop him from using his skill, and Mimori has to kill it since the only way out is to use the gem on its forehead. To activate his skill, he needs to say it out loud and be within a certain distance, but none of that matters if the Soul Eater can attack him before he finishes casting the spell. While Mimori is still thinking about what to do, the Soul Eater breaks out of the wall to go after him, so he really has no choice but to fight now. Meanwhile, outside the ruins, a girl is trying to escape from her pursuers and decides to hide nearby, not knowing that a fierce battle is taking place inside. As the Soul Eater slowly approaches Mimori, he wonders why it hasn't fired its lasers at him yet, but he soon finds out why as the Soul Eater spits up some purple gunk, which takes the form of humans. These are the souls of the people the Soul Eater has killed, and they are being forced to attack Mimori, so if he is forced to paralyze them. However, he can't bring himself to use poison because they are still human, even if they become gross globs of paste. The Soul Eater enjoys watching as Mimori struggles because he can't attack the souls for moral reasons, and he can't attack the Soul Eater either because it would react too fast. Mimori begins breaking down and crying a lot because he says he doesn't want to hurt other people, and he's losing aura by the minute with his constant crying. But as the Soul Eater is reveling in Mimori's tears, he reveals that it was all an act as he paralyzes the Soul Eater. He knew he could never land a successful paralyze on the Soul Eater unless he managed to get it to lower its guard, so he pretended to be in the middle of a mental crisis just so the Soul Eater wouldn't suspect anything. And now that the Soul Eater is paralyzed, Mimori doesn't really care what happens to the souls if he kills the Soul Eater, and even though he spent so much time trying to become a harmless, law-abiding citizen, all he cares about are facts. Those soul puppets were trying to kill him, so they could be babies for all he cares. He's still going to poison them anyway. The Soul Eater struggles to move out of frustration that it lost to Mimori. and this lets Mimori know that powerful monsters can try to overcome his paralysis, but it does additional damage to their bodies. That's interesting and all, but he doesn't want to waste any more time here, so he casts poison on the Soul Eater and destroys it once and for all. Upon doing so, the souls that the Soul Eater consumed are released, and they all appear in front of Mimori to thank him for freeing them. They've been rooting for him as he tried to survive the ruins, and none of them really mind the fact that he looted their bodies either. Mimori is then approached by Anglin, and he has only one thing to say. He wants Mimori to take down the goddess and avenge them all. The souls of the dead pass on after that, and while Mimori normally wouldn't accept a request without some sort of compensation, he was already planning on taking her down anyway. And now that the final monster has been defeated, Mimori can open the door and begin his quest for revenge on the surface. Meanwhile, Mimori's classmates are all busy hunting to level up, and while Oyamada is busy chasing down a wolf, Takutu easily annihilates the monster with his Dragonic Burst, putting him at level 18. And Yasu is just having a blast with his powers over here. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, this girl is having a hard time coming to terms with the situation, but all of a sudden, she is approached by Asagi, who warns Kobato that she can't be spacing out like that, otherwise she'll end up getting herself killed. The reason she came over is because she wanted to discuss something with her, so she begins talking about how sooner or later the class is going to split into factions. There are a lot of powerful douchebags in the class, including her, so there's no way they'll keep getting along for much longer. That's why when the class eventually divides, she wants Kobato to join her faction. Besides, it's not like Kobato has many other options considering she's D rank. There's no way she'll be accepted into Takutu's S rank group while being D rank. The Takao sisters only ever team up with each other, and Sugu's probably going to end up dead before long. Kobato was shocked to hear that, but Asagi continues by saying Kobato needs to think long and hard about her future since she may end up with nowhere to go. And while Asagi probably won't need her help much since she's B rank, she happens to be an Oppai enthusiast, and she's particularly fond of Kobato for that reason. Now that Kobato is on board with joining the group, Asagi calls for the other girls to bring over the monster they captured. She knows Kobato hasn't been able to complete the assignment the goddess gave them, so she prepared things to make it easier for her. Now all she needs to do is kill the defenseless monster, and Asagi urges her to do it unless she wants to end up getting disposed of like Mimori. Kobato doesn't want to do it, but she knows she has no choice, so she sucks up her morals and slays the monster. Asagi praises Kobato for doing a good job and says she is officially part of the group, but Kobato is still struggling to accept what she just did. Elsewhere, Sogu has just woken up from her coma, and the pain in her stomach reminds her of what must have happened to Mimori after the goddess gut punched her, and she feels really guilty for not being able to stop it. Sogu goes on to complain to Vicious, and Vicious is really trying to play the part of a caring goddess with all the fake tears, but she says the disposal of the weak is the policy of the Alien Kingdom, so there's nothing she can do about it. Vicious also informs Sogu that she doesn't have much time to wallow in sadness over it either, since while she was knocked out, her classmates headed out to the forest to see if they were able to kill monsters or not, and many of them ended up failing the requirements of the test, thus were disposed of. Sogu asks if Vicious intends to kill off any heroes who she deems to be weak, but Vicious claims it's Alion's policy, so it's not her fault even though she's a literal goddess. Sogu sees how things are going, so she wants to make it clear to Vicious that she doesn't approve of how things are being handled. Vicious doesn't see what the problem is since it's common sense that all the worthless people should be disposed of, so Sogu asks Vicious if she is a valuable hero since she is S-class. Vicious answers that Sogu is indeed very valuable, so Sogu proposes a deal. She will go above and beyond as an S-rank hero to make up for the weaknesses of the people who failed, so she asks that Vicious stop the disposal plan. Vicious says she can agree to those terms, so she extends her hand to make it official. She also wants to apologize for punching Sogu in the stomach, but she still thinks she was justified in doing so since Sogu was acting hysterical over the situation. Sogu clearly isn't fooled by Vicious's nice act, but she's got no other choice at the moment, so she agrees to shake her hand. But as she leaves, she notes that Vicious's hands were ice cold, just like her heart probably. Meanwhile, in the dark forest, a girl is trying to escape her pursuers, and she had thought she lost them. They are way too good at tracking. Based on nothing more than a broken leaf, the sword god, Bladen is able to tell exactly where the princess might ran off to. She may be able to conceal herself, but if she keeps making rookie mistakes like these, the Holy Watchers are sure to catch up to her sooner or later. At the same time, Miyamori is just about to head out into the forest in hopes of finding a city, but before he does, he checks his stats one last time and notes that only his mana is exceptionally high at 50,000, while the rest of his stats hover around 5k. But he already knew that, so he really wants to confirm the new abilities he got with his skills leveling up. He's now able to dispel paralyze and poison at will or partially dispel it just to avoid killing his target immediately. That's going to be pretty useful when it comes to extracting information, so he decides to test it out on the next monster he encounters. For now, he's going to need a blade, or more specifically, someone who can act as a tank and handle the front lines for him. Just then, he hears some rustling in the bushes, so he goes over to check it out and finds a bunch of slimes yanging up on a single smaller slime, and he decides to stand there and watch as the smaller slime goes through his bullying character arc. Once the small slime learns to fight back, Miyamori is satisfied, so he paralyzes them all and uses the opportunity to test out the dispel option. He dispels the paralysis on the bully slimes first to get them to leave, and once they are gone, he tells the smaller slime that it doesn't need to worry since he has no intention of killing it. He's about to let it go as well, but before that, he wants to apologize for not helping sooner. He enjoyed seeing the little guy stand up for himself, so he tells the slime that it did well, and after releasing it, he heads off on his way. The slime doesn't really know what to do now since it doesn't have any slime friends to go back to, so it decides to follow Miyamori instead. Miyamori eventually notices that he is being followed, but he doesn't mind since he could use the company. Meanwhile, the Princess Knight is currently exhausted from all the running she has had to do, but even with the distance she has covered, she can still sense the presence of the Holy Watchers nearby. So they must just be waiting for her to tire out so they can capture her. Miyamori and the slime have bonded a little, so Slime is now sitting in the back of Miyamori's jacket to keep watch while he takes a look at the spellbook. After flipping through some pages, Miyamori finds the forbidden art he was looking for, and it's one that's meant to strengthen monsters. There are even instructions on how to strengthen slimes in particular, so this will come in handy for Miyamori, but he understands why it's classified as a forbidden art since these could cause a lot of chaos in the wrong hands. Before he does anything else, Miyamori talks to the slime and tells it that he is on a quest for revenge, so if the slime isn't okay with that, this is his last chance to back out. The slime says he wants to stick by Miyamori's side, so Miyamori names it Pigimaru and prepares to continue with his journey. The fleeing Princess Mai can sense that the Holy Watchers are closing in on her, so while she hopes she wouldn't have to use it, she is forced to activate her spirit contract. She offers up her sleep as payment and even does a whole Power Rangers transformation routine, but as the Holy Watchers finally catch up, they are shocked to find out that they've been tracking the wrong person since Miyamori definitely isn't their target. Now they could have just ignored Miyamori since he has nothing to do with their mission, but they're too scummy to do something like that. So one tells Miyamori to drop all his valuables so they don't have to kill him, but the other guy says he's still going to kill Miyamori anyway because it'll be fun. They also talk about doing my terrible things to his corpse, so Miyamori has already decided that these guys have got to go and walks in real quick. While the scumbags aren't paying attention, Miyamori starts shuffling away slowly. But while the group notices and think he was trying to escape, Miyamori was actually just trying to get them all within his field of vision. Miyamori plays the part of a scared weakling well, but as Maggots attempts to slice him up, he wastes no time in paralyzing him along with all his teammates. Since it was successful, Miyamori now knows that his status effects work on humans as well, so Vicious is probably the only person who's immune to them. Back to the Holy Watchers, these guys weren't as intimidating as the monsters he had to fight in the ruins, but their malicious intent was far worse, so Miyamori has no issue with killing them since they tried to kill him first. He casts his poison, and after all the Holy Watchers are dead, Miyamori spends some time looting their corpses, but then both he and Pigimaru sense some nearby. Meanwhile, the Princess Mai has been standing in battle position for a while now, and she just noticed that she can no longer feel the presence of the Holy Watchers in the forest, but she thinks it must be some kind of trap to get her to lower her guard. However, just then she senses someone else in the forest and it's freaking her out. This guy's presence isn't immensely powerful, but for some reason, the spirits are scared of him. Just then, she hears something behind her, so she attacks. However, it turns out to be Pigimaru who was acting as a distraction for Miyamori. And with the girl's back turned, Miyamori paralyzes her. He sensed her intent to attack, but it wasn't out of malice, so Miyamori grew curious and thought they could chat for a bit, although he doesn't let her move as a precaution. She asks him what he wants from her, so Miyamori explains that he's not from around here and needs help learning about the area, so he was hoping she could make herself useful. Before that, she asked about the other 4 guys that were in the forest, so Miyamori tells her that he killed them. The girl is shocked, so Miyamori asks if it's a problem that he killed them, but she says she is just surprised that Miyamori was able to defeat the Holy Watchers on his own. She can sense that Miyamori isn't lying to her, probably thanks to one of her abilities, so she agrees to answer any questions Miyamori may have for her in return for saving her life from the Holy Watchers. Miyamori can tell that this girl isn't a bad person, so he trusts her a little more now, but there are still some things that he would rather keep to himself though, and the same goes for the girl, so they both agree not to pry into each other's personal matters. As the timer for paralysis counts down, Mimori asks a lot of questions and learns that this place isn't even Alien. He is currently in a place called the Kingdom of Yuzul, so the goddess disposed of him in someone else's kingdom. Mimori still has one last question for the girl, so he pulls out a page from the Forbidden Arts book and asks the girl if she understands it. The girl is able to recognize that it is some sort of ancient script, but that was as much as she could say since she wasn't able to read it either. However, she says she may know of someone who can understand that writing, so she tells Mimori about the Witch of Taboos. She possessed such vast knowledge of forbidden techniques that she was deemed too dangerous and was driven from her homeland. Mimori asks where he should go if he wants to find her, so the girl instructs him to go to the land of the golden-eyed monsters, but it's a treacherous part of the continent. Mimori thanks her for the valuable information, but the girl doesn't feel like she has done enough to repay her debts since Mimori saved her life. Mimori says she doesn't have to worry about doing any more than this, so they'll be parting ways now. The girl is fine with it as long as Mimori is satisfied, and Mimori can tell that she has a strong sense of honor and honesty, which reminds him a lot of his aunt, who was so nice that it often made him worry about her. He tells her that the paralysis will be undone in a few minutes, but he can't guarantee her safety since he will be leaving now. As Mimori leaves, he says he hopes the girl makes it to her destination safely, and as Pigimura returns, he asks if Mimori isn't going to kill her. Mimori says he wouldn't do that since he doesn't find any joy in killing, he just does it for self-defense, so there's no reason to pointlessly murder the girl. Although we can't guarantee that the girl won't come after him to attack once she's free to move again, so he asks Pigimura to keep watching his back for him. Mimori soon makes it to the town, and he is stopped at the front gate by a guard who is in charge of performing security checks. She assumes Mimori must be a traveling mercenary who came here to conquer the mill's ruins. Mimori plays along with the story and says he indeed came here to conquer the ruins, also adding that he comes from a rural town, so he doesn't know much about this place. His story seems convincing enough for the guard, so she lets him in since she has orders to allow as many mercenaries as possible to enter the town. Mimori is surprised by the relaxed security since there were no luggage checks or full cavity body searches, but it works out well for him since his plans are going smoothly. The first thing he does is head to an inn to get himself a room, but while he's at the front desk, the innkeeper is being pretty rude to him since he thinks Mimori is a broke loser. However, little does he know, Mimori looted a bunch of money off the corpses of the Holy Watchers, and as soon as he flashes a bit of cash, the innkeeper starts treating him a whole lot nicer. Mimori gets to stay in a room like he wanted, and now that his accommodations have been secured, he goes out into town for a bit to survey the area. And even though he's an outsider, he doesn't feel any hostility directed towards him, so he takes a leisurely stroll and comes across places like item shops and the town's Adventurers Guild. This information may come in handy later, but for now, Mimori has gotten hungry, so he turns around and heads to a nearby tavern to grab some food. He tries the food of this world for the first time, and it doesn't taste great, but it's edible enough that Mimori is okay eating it. He thinks this tavern is great because the people here are happy and drunk, and thus makes it easy to gather information since everyone is talking so loudly. He is able to overhear some guys talking about how the continent is full of insanely strong people, so they're having a power-scaling debate about who they think is the strongest. But in the end, they know that there's only one team that can hold the title of strongest, and that's the Black Dragon Knights who destroyed the kingdom of Mia. Their 5 dragons alone are enough to completely wipe out an army, but on top of that, they've got humanity's strongest and the hero's slayer, so it's a safe bet to say they would win any direct confrontation. After Miyamori has gathered a good amount of intel for the night, he takes some leftover rice back to his room so he can feed Pigimaro. And while Pigimaro is eating, he goes over his plans for the future. For now, his top priority is finding someone who knows how to read the language in the scrolls of forbidden magic, and the only person who would be able to do that is the Witch of Taboos. Another priority of his is to make the monster strengthening solution so he can improve the abilities of Pigimaro. But now that he's thinking about it, the nobleman of this town has been gathering mercenaries to conquer the mill's ruins, and one of the ingredients needed for the strengthening solution are the bones of a skeleton soldier. And skeleton soldiers just so happen to be found in the mill's dungeon, so Miyamori makes plans to head there tomorrow. The next day, all the mercenaries in town gather to what the Marquis, Cred Hercley, has to say. Cred tells them that a new floor within the ruins has been uncovered, so he is tasking them all with exploring said floor. And as a reward, he promises that whosoever manages to acquire the Dragon-Eye Chalice that is within the ruins will receive a prize of 300 gold pieces. He is also willing to pay a good price for any other treasures that are brought back, and the mercenaries are free to use whatever monster parts they find as they see fit. Miyamori is glad because that means he will be allowed to keep the skeleton bones from the ruins once he acquires them. Now that everyone is clear on the terms, they all line up to begin registration, but while Miyamori is waiting in line, he notices a commotion going on at the other end of the line. There's this random guy constantly yapping about how one girl in line is really pretty. In fact, she's so pretty that he could swear she was a princess. Or maybe even a princess knight of the destroyed kingdom of Nian who has a bounty on her head perhaps. You see, what happened was that a couple years back, this guy tried asking the princess knight out on a date, but she said no. And from that day onwards, he had burned her face, voice, and chest into his memory so he could get his revenge someday. And she went to great lengths to ensure her face was covered, so the man has to have some degenerate skill if he was able to recognize her just from her opie. Anyway, to prove that he is right about her identity, he reaches over to pull off her cloak and show the crowd her face, but as he does so, he is shocked to find out that the girl's face isn't the same as that of Princess Saris Ashrain, and the girl now states that her name is Miss Pelucas. He never misidentifies Opie, so he knows that she must be Ashrain, but he has no way of proving it, so he swears to get his revenge on Mist, as well as every beautiful woman that has made him look like a fool. A little while later, Mimori is planning on going shopping for some supplies to use during the mission, but as he is walking, the girl approaches him to ask if he's here to explore the dungeon as well. Mimori recognizes her and feels sympathetic that she has to deal with so many people trying to reveal her identity, but she says it's not that much of a problem since she disguised her face ahead of time. Still, Mimori suggests she be careful about guys like that because even if he doesn't know her real identity for now, he seems like he's petty enough to try attacking her just because she made him look like a fool in front of everyone. But that said, Mimori tells her that he has a request he would like to make, so he explains that he has no idea about the value of the items in this town, so he would like her to help him negotiate so that he doesn't get swindled. And of course, he isn't asking her to do this for free as he promises to compensate her for her assistance if she accepts. She decides to accept his offer since she's pretty much broke right now, so the two shake hands and she introduces herself to him as her alias, Mist, while Mimori introduces himself under the name Hati. The two of them proceed to go shopping together, and since Mist went negotiated for him, she ultimately saves Mimori around 3 silver coins worth in deals, so he gives that to her as her compensation. She is surprised to receive this much money just for shopping with him, but Mimori believes is a fair reward for the help she offered him, so she accepts the payment and is about to leave. But as she attempts to walk away, she ends up collapsing to the ground. Mimori asks her if she is alright and she says she's okay, but she hasn't been able to sleep well for the past few days, so she's a little tired. She then turns and leaves, so Mimori leaves things as they are and decides to head to the ruins to begin hunting for skeletons. Within the ruins, as Mimori is descending the stairs, he hears some mercenaries scream as they run past him that there's a little ox demon down there, so Mimori assumes it must be a miniature version of the minotaurs he had to fight in the ruins of Disposal. The ox demon charges towards him, but Mimori quickly paralyzes and poisons it, so it wasn't much of a threat to him. He then stabs the ox demon to test whether the demon's skin is as tough as the ones in the abandoned ruins, but this one is much easier to stab. A little while later, those mercenaries that ran away earlier return with backup to defeat the ox demon, but when they find it dead, they are shocked that someone was actually capable of killing a monster like this so quickly. Mimori heads deeper into the ruins, but despite the place crawling with monsters, he isn't feeling very threatened by any of them since they are easy to kill. He isn't getting much experience from killing the monsters either, so he decides to head a little deeper into the ruins to find some strong monsters. While walking through the halls, he happens to overhear that loser from earlier talking to a couple mercenaries, and he is asking them to go after Miss and make her regret ever being born, all because she didn't want to go on a date with him and made him look like he was wrong about her identity. So he can't let her continue to live in this world, and preferably, he wants the mercenaries to make her suffer as much as possible before killing her so he can see the twisted look of despair on her. At first, the mercenaries thought it was messed up to go this far just because someone ignored him, but money is money, so they agree to do it and start talking about how they will torture her. Mimori overhears all of this, and since he is sure these guys are irredeemable scumbags at this point and he's not about to let them get away with their plans to kill Mist, so he steps out to confront them. As soon as they see him, they all threaten to kill Mimori, but Mimori just raises his hand and paralyzes them all. He then inflicts poison on them, and it feels oddly satisfying to eliminate scumbags when he gets the chance. After the scumbags are dead, Mimori continues his venture into the ruins, but before he heads to the next level, he decides to take a little break. 3 hours later, Mimori wakes up from his nap and thanks Piggymaru for being a lookout in case any monsters showed up. He exits the room to head to the next floor, but before he can do that, he runs into a team of mercenaries and they tell him to be careful since there's a lot of strange stuff happening in these ruins. People have been coming across a lot of monster corpses, but it's not clear what killed the monsters since there are no clear signs of attack. It pretty much looks like the monsters fell over dead in the middle of the ruins. As the leader of the Saber Tigers party, Lily Adamantite, values the lives of her teammates more than anything else. So while she would normally continue with the ruins exploration, she has made the decision to back out and head back to the surface. She even offers to let Mimori come with her. But Mimori says he wants to continue with the ruins exploration, so Lily and the rest of her team wishes him good luck with that. Mimori knows all the unexplained deaths are because of him, but it works out well in his favor since if people believe there's something strange going on in the ruins, that means fewer mercenaries will show up in the ruins. Mimori heads down deeper until he finally arrives at the room where the dragon chalice is located, and there's a giant gargoyle statue right beside it, but it's totally harmless, so there's no need to worry about it. Yeah, Mimori isn't stupid, so he casts Paralyze and Poison on the statue, and sure enough, it turns out to be a monster, and it soon ends up dying. Mimori has now officially obtained the dragon chalice, and soon after he acquires it, Mist shows up and is disappointed that she didn't manage to get here first. Mimori doesn't really care about the chalice, so he says Mist can have it if she wants. She can't believe Mimori would give her something worth 300 gold coins, so she asks what he wants in return, but Mimori honestly doesn't need anything from her. Mist says she can't accept something so valuable for free, but Mimori says she should just hurry up and take it, and she should probably get some proper sleep soon, otherwise she will end up collapsing. She still doesn't feel right accepting this, so Mimori tells her that he never cared about the cup in the first place. What he is really after is located further down in the ruins, so Mist offers to act as his guard while he's down there. Right now, the only thing she can think to offer him is her skill with her sword, and she promises not to be a hindrance, so Mimori agrees under a few conditions. The first condition is that neither of them ask too many questions about each other's personal lives, and he won't necessarily be returning to the surface within a day, so if Mist wants to return by herself, Mimori won't be responsible for her safety. Mist agrees to the terms, so they head down to the next floor, and Mist shows Mimori just how useful she can be as she cuts down a giant flower monster. Mimori is impressed, but there's something he would like to ask her about. He has noticed that some monsters have golden eyes while others don't, so he was wondering what the difference is between them. Mist explains that monsters with golden eyes are said to contain experience, so they are the perfect prey for monsters, the heroes of another world to level up. She has no idea that Mimori is one of said heroes, so she goes on to explain that heroes gain no experience from killing humans, so experience for them is something that is unique to monsters. And in regards to monsters without golden eyes, they are just regular monsters and can even form friendly relationships with humans under the right circumstances. According to legends, the Demon King radiates a powerful energy known as Demon Essence, and monsters which are affected by this essence become incredibly violent and have their eyes turn gold. Before they go any further, Mimori suggests they take a break so Mist can get some sleep, but she says she doesn't need any sleep since she is meant to be guarding Mimori, but he eventually convinces her to lie down. And once she does, he casts sleep on her so she can get some proper rest. Meanwhile, the Black Dragon Knights have just come across the site where the Holy Watchers were killed, and their leader, Siva, is excited to face the person who was strong enough to take out the Holy Watchers so easily. After a few hours, Mimori's sleep effect wears off, so Mist's disguise returns as she wakes up and she has no idea how she fell asleep since her pact should still be in effect. She looks around for Mimori, and to her relief, it looks like he was sleeping the entire time, so he couldn't have seen her true identity. However, Mimori is just pretending to sleep so she doesn't become paranoid, and once he pretends to wake up, they continue their journey further into the dungeon. They soon arrive in another room, and while it looks like it's empty, Mimori hears an unsettling sound, so he warns Mist to back away from the door, and moments later, a Skeleton King emerges. Mimori can tell that the Skeleton King is much stronger than any other monster they've faced till now, but Mist believes they should be able to slay it if they target the silver part on its chin. That's a pretty obvious weak spot, but the Skeleton King is still a formidable monster. It is so strong that it would take all the members of the Saber Tiger Party to defeat it. The Skeleton King seems to think Mist is the biggest threat here, so she's likely going to get targeted first. She needs to get ready to defend herself, so she tells Mimori that she's about to use her trump card, but she would like it to remain a secret for as long as possible, so she asks him to keep it between them. Mist also apologizes in advance because if the monster exceeds her expectations, and she may not be able to defend Mimori as she had promised earlier. Mimori agrees that the Skeleton King is strong and fighting it would probably be rather troublesome, so he decides to use his ability and paralyze the monster. Mist is shocked when the monster freezes in place, and even more so when Mimori poisons it and defeats the monster in world record time. Now that it has been defeated, Mimori begins collecting the bones from the Skeleton King and confirms that these are the ones the recipe requires. He says they can head back to the surface now, but he can tell that Mist has dozens of questions to ask him, so he says he will give her some answers as long as the questions aren't too invasive. Just then, Pigimura gets Mimori's attention and tells him that there's something interesting over by the skeleton. So Mimori goes to take a look, and he indeed finds something interesting. It's a magic cloth with an egg wrapped inside it. And while he has no idea what to do with it, he decides to take it with him regardless. Meanwhile, Mimori's classmates are all running away in fear after encountering a group of skeleton soldiers, and this girl in particular is freaking out on the floor over her dismembered hand. But there are still skeletons approaching to dismember more than her hand. So Sogu is trying to step up and defend her weaker classmates, but Oyamada doesn't give a shit about his classmates and runs and blasting the skeletons. And so does Takutu, although he nearly kills his classmates as well, but why would he care about them? He just hit level 24, so he is too busy patting himself on the back for a job well done. Meanwhile, Mimori and Mist have made it back to the surface, and Mist presents the dragon chalice so she can receive her reward. And while the crowd surrounds her to get a look at the chalice, Mimori quietly walks away since he has gotten everything he needs from the mill's ruins. After a while, Mist catches up to Mimori and tells him that an award ceremony is going to be held tomorrow where she will be awarded her prize money, so she's still going to need to stay in town till then. Since she's not busy for the rest of the day, Mimori asks if he can have a chat with her in private. He asks if they can meet up in his room later tonight, and Mist is fine with that. So Mimori turns to leave, but before he goes, she grabs Mimori by the arm and thanks him once again for giving her the dragon chalice. Later that night, Pigimura is eating his dinner while Mimori prepares the monster-strengthening solution, and just as he finishes making it, Mist arrives at his door. Mimori lets her inside, and he gets right to the point as he tells Mist that he wants to hire her as his bodyguard. Mist is rather surprised by the proposal, but Mimori thought it would be a win-win since she would get extra travel funds, but then again, if she receives the 300 gold coins, then she probably won't need to worry about money for a while. In any case, he pulls out a map and tells Mist that his goal is to reach the Witch of Taboos in the land of the golden-eyed monsters. He is expecting to get swarmed by a large number of monsters on his journey at least once, so he would feel a lot better if he had a capable warrior there to watch his back for him. And after working with her in the mills, he believes Mist would be the perfect bodyguard for him. Mist happens to be on her way to Yonato, which means she could accompany Mimori quite conveniently, but she is still hesitant to accept the offer for some reason. Mimori notices this and tells her that there's no rush to answer right away. Besides, he had something he wanted to discuss with Ceres first anyway. It takes her a moment to realize that Mimori just called her by her real name, and once she does, she asks Mimori how he knew about her real identity. Mimori reveals that he was the one who put her to sleep back in the dungeon, and as such, he saw her real face. It's clear that she was hesitating to accept his offer because she was worried about how difficult it would be to keep her identity secret from him while traveling together, which is probably the reason she refused to sleep while working with Mimori earlier. He assures her that he has no intention of selling her out for any reason, so she doesn't have to worry about him betraying her. Ceres reveals that she uses the power of spirits to conceal her identity, but in exchange, she has to forego her desire to sleep. That's why she returns to normal when she goes to sleep, and it's also the reason why the Holy Watchers were chasing her back in the forest, since they managed to spot her while she was asleep and didn't have her disguise. She begins to undo her disguise as she tells Mimori that she is grateful for him killing the Holy Watchers, since she has a lot less to worry about now. Mimori asks if the fact that she removed her disguise around him means that she trusts him now, and Ceres confirms that she believes he is a trustworthy person. She officially agrees to act as Mimori's bodyguard, and the two shake hands to mark their new partnership. Mimori reaches into his bag and pulls out a blue gem to give to Ceres as her payment, but Ceres is stunned as he hands it to her because this thing is an authentic blue dragon gem. Mimori doesn't know what the big deal is since it's just one of the gems he looted in the abandoned ruins, so Ceres explains that gems like this are incredibly rare and are even worth way more than the dragon chalice. Mimori doesn't really care that the gem is valuable, so he tells Ceres she can still keep the gem anyway. Ceres doesn't want to accept it because it is worth way too much, but Mimori has a whole bag full of them, so he insists that she keep the gem. Ceres finally relents and agrees to accept the gem as payment, but before they go their separate ways for today, Mimori says they should still call each other by their aliases to protect their identities when they are out in public. Ceres agrees to this, and since they will be working together for a while, she thinks she should inform Mimori of the reason why she is on the run. However, Mimori tells her he doesn't need to know as he has no interest in prying into her past unnecessarily, nor does he want her to feel pressure into telling him anything. The next day, Mimori and Ceres are having breakfast together, and Mimori takes the opportunity to ask her if she happens to know anything about forbidden magic. Ceres tells him that it is magic that has been prohibited by Vicious, but they are generally understood to be specific ancient spells. The only reason the spells are forbidden is because Vicious said so and the people don't like questioning her. If Vicious went through the trouble to personally outlaw the forbidden spells, then it is very likely that she did so because the spells could be dangerous to her. Unfortunately, Ceres doesn't have any more information on the forbidden spells, but Mimori says she has given him a good amount of info, so he's thankful. After breakfast, Ceres says she needs to go to the award ceremony so she can get her prize, so she will meet back up with Mimori in the afternoon, and after going their separate ways, Mimori decides to head into the forest and test out that monster-strengthening potion he made. Meanwhile, at the reception for Ceres, an illusionist was hired to make sure the dragon chalice was the real thing, and this wouldn't be an issue normally, but Ceres has a bad feeling about this since she's using illusion magic to hide her identity. Hours go by and Ceres still hasn't returned like she had said she would, so Mimori is starting to get rather worried. Meanwhile, Vicious is having a meeting with Sogu over the recent ruin expedition to the ruins that the class took, and Sogu asks if Vicious can take care of Sakura, since she got her hand cut off. Vicious agrees to heal the girl, but she makes it clear that she's only doing it because Sakura is B rank. Otherwise, if she were something like D rank, then health insurance wouldn't be available for her. By the way, Vicious asks Sogu if she has considered joining Takuju's team, but Sogu can't imagine herself getting along with Takuju when he cares so little about the lives around him. Vicious calls Sogu's decision selfish, so Sogu starts trying to explain herself, but Vicious tells her she isn't obligated to justify herself, although she wants to know if Sogu is still committed to saving this world since she isn't putting in as much effort as an S-rank adventurer should. Sogu asserts that she is fulfilling her duties as an S-rank in her own way, so Vicious agrees to let her do as she pleases, but she also says that Sogu will be tasked with taking care of those who couldn't pass the trials. Vicious wants her to train them, but Sogu is against the idea since the original deal was that she would fight on behalf of the weak ones. Vicious claims that a royal decree ordered her to dispose of all heroes who aren't capable of fighting. So Vicious wants Sogu to train them so they can learn to kill monsters, and of course, if Sogu refuses, Vicious will immediately dispose of her weak classmates, so Sogu doesn't really have much of a choice here. She is forced to agree to Vicious's terms, and as she is leaving, Vicious points out that if any of her classmates become a hindrance to her, she may have to deal with them herself, but of course it's not like she wants to get rid of them or anything. Back to Mimori, more time has passed and Ceres still isn't back yet, so either she ditched him or something happened to her. And considering how honest she has been thus far, the only possibility is that she got abducted. She has no reason to even want to lie to Mimori in the first place because we gain nothing from doing so. As Mimori is on his way to go looking for Ceres, he hears two guys talking about how Ceres' identity was revealed during the banquet, and she was forced to flee into the forest to escape, but Mibbles is organizing a hunting party to go after her. And this hunting party consists of the Black Dragon Knights. As the knights chase after Ceres, she attempts to transform using her spirit regalia, but her spirit of light got disoriented when her disguise was destroyed, so she won't be able to transform for now and has to fight in base form. She manages to take out a couple of the lower-ranked knights, but it was really difficult for her, so she fears what might happen if one of the higher-ranking members were to attack her now. Just then, she notices an arrow being fired at her from behind, but she can tell that it is just a distraction, so she quickly rushes to face her real opponent, the Dragon Knight's vice captain. He is a much tougher foe than the rest of them, so she struggles to defend herself and she unfortunately loses her footing, so the vice captain disarms her as she falls to the ground and gets on top of her. He is about to do unspeakable things, but before he actually does anything, Mimori arrives and paralyzes him. Ceres is shocked to see Mimori here, but she knows she is safe now, so she climbs out from under the vice captain and Mimori gives him a non-lethal dose of poison for good measure. Ceres asks Mimori why he came looking for her, but before their conversation goes any further, Mimori puts the vice captain to sleep so he can't overhear them. Ceres warns Mimori that if he stays with her, then he will be pursued by the Black Dragon Knights as well, so she's willing to return the gem he gave her and nullify their contract so that she doesn't cause him any trouble. Mimori tells her that won't be necessary because for one, he has a lot of those gems, so the money isn't an issue for him, but more importantly, he isn't going to find another bodyguard whom he can trust like Ceres, so he's going to stick with her. And right now, he needs Ceres to take off her clothes. After an awkward pause, Mimori clarifies that he is only saying this because the people in town already saw her in the clothes she's wearing now, so she would be easily recognized if she doesn't get changed soon. Ceres is relieved to hear that, and Mimori tells her that he also has a proposal to make to her. He says she can try negotiating with the Witch of Taboos to have her shelter Ceres for the time being. No one has ever managed to figure out where the witch lives yet, so it should be a safe place for Ceres to hide. And Mimori is heading there anyway, so he and Ceres can keep their original agreement for her to be his bodyguard. Ceres is grateful that Mimori is looking out for her, but she wonders why he is going so far to help her when they barely know one another. It may seem strange to her, but he explains that Ceres reminds him of someone very precious to him, so if he were to abandon her here, it would feel like he had abandoned his aunt, and he can't do that. Ceres once again thanks Mimori for being so kind to her, and now that they've settled their agreement, Mimori goes over to the vice captain and partially dispels the paralysis to allow him to speak. The vice captain immediately begins threatening Mimori for daring to oppose a member of the Dragon Knights, but Mimori isn't fazed and gives him an ultimatum. He can tell him what the Dragon Knights are planning, and if he does, Mimori will show mercy to him. Otherwise, he's going to die a slow and painful death. The man tries to act cool and confident, but he ultimately agrees to tell Mimori and Ceres what they want to know, but before he can spill the beans, his brains get spilled all over the floor by his sword from the sky. Mimori and Ceres turn around to get a look at the attacker, and to his horror, not only is the attacker out of range, but it's actually Sivit. He has many names across this world, but he is most commonly referred to by the title of humanity's strongest. Stivit and his 5 dragon riders are all here aside from the one whose brains are all over the floor though. Orban asks Sivit if it was really necessary to kill him, but Sivit doesn't really care about casualties as long as the mission is complete. They were ordered to do this by Ortola, and that name seems to be familiar to Ceres, so she's frozen in shock. At the same time, Ortola is lying in his bed and agonizing over the thought of what he has done. He never wanted to hurt Ceres because he loved her like a daughter, and more specifically, like a stepdaughter, because he explicitly states that seeing her always had him focused and stiff. He does not regret letting her escape, rather what he regrets is the fact that some other man could be having romantic relations with her. So he decided that the best course of action here was to kill her instead. Ceres can't believe Ortola would do something like that, but it's the truth. In fact, that's what Gizon was going to tell her. But since Sivit thought he was being a hindrance, he threw his sword and killed him. Although if Gizon had managed to dodge it somehow, then Sivit would have let him live. But even if Gizon had been paralyzed by Mimori, there was no way he could have dodged an attack like that. The Dragon Riders ask what they should do with Ceres now, and according to the orders Ortola gave him, he wants Ceres to be killed and her dead body to be brought back to him intact, at which point necrophilia is on the table for him. Ceres still can't believe that Ortola would order something like this, but Sivit tells her that he is willing to give her the chance to earn her life back. He is obsessed with finding strong opponents, so if Ceres can beat him in a duel, then he will let her go free. He has been eager to test out the famous spirit regalia of hers, which is why he was so motivated to catch up to her. But right now, he's a lot more interested in Mimori than in Ceres. Mimori is sweating bullets because he is at risk of being killed at any moment, and Sivit and his team are all still slightly out of range for his ability, so his options for counterattack are limited. But even with this dire situation, Mimori still has a smile on his face as he takes a gamble. He asks Sivit if he can talk with him as he slowly makes his way forward, but Sivit asks him to identify himself first. Mimori introduces himself under the name Hadi, but Sivit can immediately tell that it's a fake name, and if Mimori has a reason to want to hide his name, then there must be some kind of story behind it. The Dragon Riders don't understand why Sivit is even listening to a random boy in the first place, but Sivit finds it interesting that Mimori shows no fear despite being confronted by the strongest party on the continent. In fact, Sivit can tell that Mimori looks like he is preparing to attack or something, and almost no one ever even considers attacking Sivit, so he knows Mimori must be at least a bit special. Mimori asks Sivit if it is true that he is currently searching for a worthy opponent to give him a battle he will be satisfied with, and Sivit confirms this to be true. But if that's the case, Mimori asks why Sivit doesn't go after some more obviously strong people. For example, the goddess Vicious and the heroes. Sivit explains that he has a non-aggression pact with Vicious, so he can't fight her, but he still has hope in the heroes who had been summoned by Vicious, since he had heard the story of how heroes start out weak, but over time build up an incredible amount of strength, so he is patiently waiting for the day when one of them becomes strong enough to challenge him. It would be great if they have power necessary to kill him too, since Sivit has been bored with life recently, with how he is always the best at everything. Out of courtesy for Mimori, Sivit even offers to kill Ceres painlessly and have her head delivered to the current princess of Nia. Ceres asks why he would need to do that, so Sivit informs her that her escape led to Alayam becoming hostile to this kingdom, and recently, they even invaded because the goddess demanded that Ceres be handed over to her, but Emperor Ortola refused. It's at this point that Mimori speaks up and makes an interesting proposal to Sivit. He says that if Sivit is truly looking for an opponent that is capable of killing him, then Mimori can become that opponent for him. Earlier, Sivit mentioned that he has high hopes that the summoned heroes will become strong enough to defeat him, So Mimori reveals that he is in fact one of these summoned heroes. Civet is able to detect whether someone is lying or not, so he can tell that Mimori is telling the truth. He asks what he is doing all the way out here if he is a hero. So Mimori says that he holds a very unique position among his fellow heroes, so he was allowed to act independently by Vicious herself. Now this technically isn't a lie since Mimori is the only E rank, so he definitely is in a unique position, and Vicious did say that he will be allowed to do whatever he wants if he manages to survive the abandoned ruins, so that was basically her giving permission for him to act independently. Since everything Mimori said is technically true, Civet's lie detection leads him to believe that Mimori must be a truly promising hero for Vicious to give him special treatment, and that gets him excited, so he asks Mimori to state his proposal. Mimori says he would like to defer their fight, meaning he wants Civet to spare him until he can grow strong enough to give him the fight he has been dreaming of. Civet is amused, so he asks Mimori how he intends to do that, and Mimori informs him of his intentions to go to the land of the golden-eyed monsters to train, but he will definitely return to Vicious sooner or later, so Civet won't have to worry about Mimori going into hiding. Everything he has said so far has convinced Civet, so Civet agrees to spare Mimori's life so he can grow strong enough to be a worthy opponent. He tells Mimori that he can leave without having to worry about getting attacked. However, he still intends to kill Ceres. So Mimori speaks up again and tells Civet that he needs Ceres in order to get through the land of golden-eyed monsters. So Civet laughs and agrees to not harm Ceres either, and he won't let any of his subordinates touch her either until his duel with Mimori is over. Mimori is really proud of his acting skills right now because he actually managed to talk his way out of a direct fight with Civet, but as far as training so that he can have a rematch with Civet goes, Mimori's not stupid. Civet's back is turned, but he is still within range, so Mimori immediately seizes the opportunity to use Paralyze on Civet and all the other dragon riders. Mimori apologizes for betraying Civet's trust, but he's not kind enough to ignore a clear opening to attack, and Mimori's goal is to ultimately get revenge on the goddess, so he doesn't have time to be worrying about Civet and the others. Civet is enraged that he was betrayed, and his title of humanity's strongest isn't for nothing as he is managing to move even though he is under paralysis and poison, but he ultimately isn't able to overcome it. As one of the Dragon Knights is about to die, he sets off a signal to call in all the Dragon Knights that were on standby in the forest, and as Civet sees them, he warns them all that they need to stay out of Mimori's effective range, so they should attack from the sky. However, Mimori had already thought of a plan to deal with the problem of having a low range on his ability, which is why after giving Pigimuru the monster-strengthening potion, he is now able to link with him. It has a couple downsides since it takes a long time to get into this state, and it burns through his MP, but once complete, he can use his slime tendrils to greatly extend the effective range of his paralyzed skill and knocks the Dragon Knights to the ground. Using his skills so much earned Mimori a couple of new skills. He tests a few out on some of the knights, of which he learns that Berserk is a skill that causes someone to have violent urges, and Darkness is a skill that dulls one's senses and sends them into a world of pitch black. Before long, all the remaining Dragon Knights have been killed, and the only one left alive is Civet, who is still trying to fight off the effects, but he too dies shortly thereafter. Following this, Mimori thanks Ceres for staying by his side and guarding him while he was fighting the Dragon Knights, but she tells him not to mention it because it is the least she could do as his bodyguard. However, there's another threat Ceres wants to warn Mimori of. She tells him about someone called the Hero Slayer, who is an aggressive man who could have potentially rivaled Civet. But as it so happens, Mimori already off-screened the Hero Slayer, so there aren't really any more immediate threats to them. Meanwhile, back with the other heroes, Songu is getting a little worried since she hasn't awakened a special skill yet, but all of a sudden, a purple-haired girl arrives and tells them all that Vicious is busy, so she will be taking over as their training instructor. Oyamata gets in her face and asks why they should listen to her in the first place, but the girl almost instantly knocks him out, so she has proven that she is strong enough to be in charge and tells everyone to get ready because they are heading back to the capital. On Mimori's end, he has just finished telling Ceres about his backstory and how he wishes to get revenge on the goddess for what she did to him, and Ceres is willing to help him in any way she can. Mimori has already risked his life on multiple occasions to save her, so as long as she is able to be of use to him, she will be by his side. Back at the abandoned ruins, the guards in charge of making sure nothing goes wrong arrive to check on the place, and something has definitely gone wrong because the crystal for the gate has burnt out. This would normally mean that someone managed to open the door from the inside and get out, so one of the guards thinks they should probably report this to Alian, but that would be too much paperwork, so the others decide it would be better to pretend nothing happened here. Besides, it's not like anyone could have actually survived the abandoned ruins and made it out alive. That would be impossible. Meanwhile, Mimori is out enjoying a festival in town, and he happens to pick up a cool-looking mask on sale. So the stall owner begins telling him about the Lord of Flies, who the mask is made to resemble. The Lord of Flies is a person who once turned an island of monsters into his fortress, making himself the master of the demons that were ostracized by evil itself. The Lord of Flies and his army were eventually wiped out, but because he was so cool, he remains popular to this day even though he was evil. Mimori decides to buy the mask and heads into a tent to try it on. He's not exactly an upstanding hero, so a mask resembling a demon would be much more fitting for him. He once again swears to himself that he will make Vicious pay for what she did to him, and his determination shouldn't be underestimated because he's literally got nothing better to do. Over in the Magnar Kingdom, the news of the downfall of the 5 dragons has reached the Holy Alliance, and the King of Magnar finds it quite hard to believe that the man hailed as humanity's strongest warrior was defeated overnight. The King of Ulza tells him that he personally identified the corpses of the dragon riders, so there's no doubt that they are all dead. The King of Magnar asks if the goddess of Alian has any information on the matter, so Vicious informs him that the dragon riders were apparently chasing after Ceres when they met their demise, and while they don't know where Ceres was headed after the fight, they did find evidence of some of Ceres's torn clothes and a lot of her blood. Judging from the amount, they believe it might be possible that she was confronted with the Black Dragon Knights and killed them all, but was gravely wounded in the process and blowed to death somewhere else. The Black Knights were humanity's best hope against the Great Demon Empire, so losing them is a huge blow to the strength of the Holy Alliance, so the heroes from another world are even more valuable than they were before. The Emperor of Mira, Falk, thinks it's funny how every time Great Eagle comes, Alian always seems to benefit in some way. Vicious keeps her polite tone and asks Falk what he's trying to insinuate with his statement, but Falk is serious. Every time something bad happens, they are forced to rely on Alian and its heroes, so it's pretty convenient for Vicious. Vicious says they are all equally affected by the Dark Lord's essence, so she's on the same side as them. But she's being very passive-aggressive towards Falk, so he decides to stop talking before things go too far. There's one final thing that needs to be discussed before they adjourn this meeting, so the King of Magnar asks if everyone here truly believes Ceres was capable of killing all 5 of the Black Dragon Knights. It's pretty hard to believe she was capable of doing something like that on her own, that they have no idea who could have been behind it. However, a messenger comes into the room and informs him that there is a group that is taking credit for the defeat of the Black Dragon Knights, and they call themselves the Curse Magic Users of Ashint. The next day, Mimori and Ceres are walking through town to stock up on supplies, and it doesn't look like anyone is following them, so this place might be the safest bet for their preparation. While walking, Mimori notices a huge coliseum nearby, so Ceres explains that it is a blood sport coliseum where slaves and mercenaries kill each other for the entertainment of the crowd. The fighters can earn rewards by winning their matches, and since it is run by the Duke and the Mercenary Guild, it has become a prime source of entertainment for the public. Although at first it was just a way for the Mercenary Guild to assess their fighters. Ceres and Mimori later find a good inn to stay at, and since they need to conserve funds, Ceres suggests that she and Mimori should share a room. Mimori asks if she is really okay with that since Mimori is a man and stuff might happen, but while she's embarrassed, she says she doesn't mind, so Mimori gets one room for both of them. After that, they head to the bar so they can get something to eat, and the place is pretty packed, so Mimori is able to overhear a conversation about the death of the Black Dragon Knights. From what he hears, it looks like people think Ceres died at the hands of the Dragon Knights, but then the Dragon Knights were taken out by someone else. A group called Ashint is taking credit for killing the Dragon Knights with their curse magic, and Ceres has heard about them before, so she tells Mimori that the group apparently worships the god of curses. Just then, the Ashint walk into the bar, and they are really enjoying all the clout they got from stealing credit for what Mimori did. After getting a good look at them, Mimori doesn't think they are actually that much of a threat, and he's not mad about them taking credit for what he did since it takes attention away from him. Mimori continues to eavesdrop on the conversation going on around him, but then he hears people talking about who else they think might have been strong enough to defeat the Black Dragon Knights, and eventually, the Witch of Taboos is mentioned. She's apparently a dark elf, and no one has actually seen her in a decade, but there's someone in the capital who has seen her before. Mimori approaches the table and asks if the guys can tell him a little more about this person, and at first they don't want to talk to Mimori, but when Mimori offers to pay for their drinks, they are much more willing to talk to him. They tell him that the person who met the Witch of Taboos is the strongest fighter in the Colosseum, and if he'd like to meet her, then he's probably going to have to talk to the owner of the Colosseum. However, Mimori is in luck, because the person in question just happened to walk into the bar. Mimori goes up to her, introduces himself, but Eve immediately knows he wants something from her, so she asks him to state his business. Mimori gets to the point and tells her that he would like to meet the Witch of Taboos. Eve admits that she has ventured into the land of the golden-eyed monsters before, but she denies ever having met the witch. But thanks to Sarah's spirits, she is able to tell that Eve is lying when she says never met the witch before. Eve asks Mimori why he wants to see the Witch of Taboos, so Mimori says he is just going out of curiosity, so Eve advises him to stay out of the land of the Golden Eye Monster, since to be frank, he doesn't think Mimori is strong enough to survive up to 3 days there. She tells Mimori that should value his life a little more, but it's a bit hypocritical coming from her since she routinely risks her life on stage. Later, Mimori is informed by Sarah's that Eve was lying, so they can guarantee that she actually knows of the whereabouts of the witch. As he returns to his hotel room, Mimori realizes that he forgot to bring some food back for Pikimura to eat, so he decides to pull out a snack he had with him when he first arrived in this world. He also gives some to Sarah's, and she has never had anything like it before, but as soon as she puts it in her mouth, she is delighted by the wonderful taste. She asks him if it is a common snack from his world, and Mimori says it is, but he unfortunately can't make any more of it. For now, they need to decide what their next move is going to be, and the first thing on the agenda is finding out the location of the witch from Eve. He needs to find a way to get her to tell him, but what would be more important to her than her life? Typically, it would be money since she buys her freedom if she has enough funds, although it would require a large sum of money. That same night, we see Eve visiting a little dark elf girl, and she promises her that she will do her best to get her out of here. Back in Mimori's room, Ceres is practicing with her spirit regalia, and it may just look like some armor with no visible boost aside from looking cool, but I'm sure it will come in handy at some point. Once Ceres is done training, Mimori asks her if she can give him some pointers on how to handle close combat since he has been relying on his skill a little too much lately, so he wants to be prepared if he is ever unable to use it. Ceres understands, so she decides to train him the same way she would train one of her knights back when she was still a knight captain. She takes a step back and tells Mimori to assault her, so he throws a straight punch, but Ceres easily evades it and puts him in an arm lock. Something like this doesn't require a weapon, and it can easily be honed with a few days of training, but as she says this, she realizes she is pretty close to Mimori, so she takes a step back and apologizes. Mimori says it is fine since he is the one who asked her to train with him. After a long and sweaty training session, Mimori is taking a bath and Ceres is engaging in some degenerate activity with Mimori's shirt. She realizes what she's doing is messed up even if she does have feelings for Mimori, and luckily it looks like no one was around to see her, except Mimori, who was standing behind her this entire time. He says he noticed that his clothes were missing, so he came to look for them, and Ceres apologizes, saying that she thought it would be a good idea to wash his clothes with hers. Later that night, Ceres is asleep and Mimori praises her for how kind she is. She is diligently trying to become a sword that can protect him, and she is suppressing all kinds of down bad emotions to fulfill her role to him, so he should be grateful to her. Ceres wakes up and notices that Mimori is still up, so he tells her he is just having a bit of trouble sleeping, and Ceres has a good remedy for that, so she gets out of bed and searches through her bag to retrieve some herbs. One of them helps with sleep, but the other has the opposite effect and leaves you excited and full of bedroom vigor. Of course, she doesn't intend to use it with Mimori though. Since he's going to be taking herbs, Mimori pulls out a soup cube from his bag and uses it to make 2 cups of soup for himself and Ceres. Mimori asks Ceres to have a taste before they add the herbs, and she is amazed by how good it tastes and how all that flavor was packed into a single tiny cube. Now that she has tried it, she's going to add the sleep herb to it. However, she accidentally spilled a lot more in there than she intended to. The second one has a regular amount of sleep herb in it, and Ceres offers to drink the overdose cup since it was her mistake in the first place. As she and Mimori drink it, they feel surprisingly refreshed, but they should be feeling sleepy. So Ceres goes to check which bottle she used, and it turns out she mixed up the excitement herbs and the sleep herbs. She sincerely apologizes to Mimori, but he says it's fine, he will just read his book to keep himself busy. Ceres asks him if there are any special services she can offer him since she is sure he is stiff as a board right now. But while Mimori is certainly feeling tempted, he asks her to just get some sleep. Ceres is surprised by how resistant Mimori is to temptations, but it's not like he doesn't want to, like his revenge takes priority over all else. So until he has made vicious pay, he won't be able to focus his attention on other things. In a way, it's like a curse that stops him from being happy until his goal has been achieved. However, once he is done with his revenge, he should be able to put his energy into other endeavors, so Ceres gets behind him and swears that she will do everything within her power to help Mimori get his revenge, and Mimori is thankful for her help. The next day, they head over to the Bloodsport Coliseum, and Ceres returns to Mimori after asking around about Eve. She is pretty famous around here, and she was sold to the Coliseum as a slave. But from the very first day she got here, she was a hit with the fans, and she hasn't lost a single match yet in her 3 years of fighting. Tomorrow is apparently her final fight, meaning she's already earned enough money to buy her own freedom, so trying to negotiate with her using money won't be an option anymore. Additionally, Sarah has learned that Eve had already saved up enough money to buy her freedom 2 years ago, and she's now trying to buy the freedom of a small elf girl as well. There's also something Sarah is worried about because all previous Colosseum champions have all died during their final match, so it looks like there's some foul play at hand, as there are rumors that the Duke is arranging to put fighters at a disadvantage during their final fights. But Miyamori smiles because this may be just what they need to get Eve to trust them. Eve is the undefeated champion, and she's really popular, so there's no doubt that the Colosseum management team would try to kill Eve off for the publicity it would create. Sarah assumes Miyamori intends to stop this from happening at the main event tomorrow, but Miyamori doesn't see a reason to wait till tomorrow to save Eve when he can just get it done today. Later that day, Miyamori corners Eve in a dark alleyway and says he needs to talk with her. Eve tries to dismiss Miyamori and tells him she doesn't know where to find the Witch of Taboos, but Miyamori already knows that she's lying. He asks if Eve is trying to keep the witch's location hidden because she is indebted to the witch, but Eve denies it. However, Sarah is there as well, and she immediately calls Eve out for lying again. Eve is starting to get suspicious of Miyamori's intentions, so she's about to draw her sword, but Miyamori stops her by saying he just wants to help save Eve. She asks him what he intends to save her from, so Miyamori explains that the Duke running the Colosseum is going to use all sorts of dirty tricks to make sure she goes down in tomorrow's match. Eve still doesn't understand why Miyamori would be trying to help her, but Miyamori just doesn't want to let his source of information on the witch die. It would be much easier to just take the girl she's trying to help and run away before the match tomorrow. Hearing this, Eve understands that Miyamori isn't a threat to her, but while she appreciates his warning, she can afford to run away from the match tomorrow. Taking the girl and running is an option, but where exactly would they run to? Unless she follows the rules and buys her and the girl's freedom, then the Duke will send mercenaries to hunt her down or put a bounty on her head. Maybe she could handle life on the run if she were alone, but she has to think about the girl's safety. Miyamori says he knows of a place where they could escape to and suggests that Eve and the girl go into hiding at the place where the Witch of Taboos lives. He is sure no one would be able to find Eve there, but she says it would be impossible since no one can reach the heart of the land of monsters. Miyamori says they might be able to reach it if they work together, and he promises to help protect the girl to the fullest of his capabilities, but Eve doesn't think he has what it takes to follow through on that promise. She can tell that the girl with him has some amount of martial arts training, but Miyamori looks like a weakling to her. Miyamori admits that he doesn't have much skill when it comes to martial arts, but he is well versed in magic. He tells her that he can easily defeat a skeleton king on his own, but while it's certainly an impressive feat, Eve isn't so convinced that Miyamori can handle the journey into the land of monsters. To prove that he is strong enough, Miyamori tells Eve that he is the one who killed the 5 dragoons, but Eve thinks he is lying, so Miyamori gives her a demonstration of the power he used to kill Civet and the others. He raises his hand and casts Paralyze on Eve, leaving her frozen in place. He warns her that she shouldn't try to move too much since it could cause damage to her body if she does. This is the power they use to defeat Civet, and just in case she still doesn't believe him, Sarah reveals her true identity, proving that the rumors of her death were false and Miyamori truly saved her from Civet. This should be enough to prove Miyamori's capabilities, so he releases Eve from the paralysis, and she is convinced that Miyamori wasn't lying to her earlier, but her decision hasn't changed at all. Miyamori sees that he's not going to be able to convince Eve, so he apologizes for disturbing her and says he hopes she finds a way to win her match tomorrow. However, if she happens to change her mind, he will be waiting at the bridge early in the morning, ready to leave town. Miyamori then walks away with Sarah's, but as they are leaving, he comes across a group of ancient followers of the cursed god, and they are still riding the hike they got from stealing credit for Miyamori's achievement. Their fraudulent actions annoy Sarah greatly, but Miyamori doesn't think there is a need to take action against them as long as they don't hurt anybody. However, as Miyamori and Sarah continue walking, they spot some of the cursed god cult members hurting someone. These guys are trying to kidnap this woman for unsavory reasons, so Sarah is prepared to cut them down immediately. However, Miyamori stops her and says he will handle it himself, so he casts one of his new spells and makes the cult members go berserk and kill one another. While they are doing that, he continues walking home with Sarah, and by the next morning, he and Sarah are all packed up and ready to go before the crack of dawn. It looks like Eve didn't show up after all, so Sarah asks Miyamori if he thinks there's a chance Eve might actually be able to win her match and earn her freedom with the little girl. Unfortunately, Miyamori says there's no way that will ever happen. Duke Zuon is well known for his shitty ways, so Eve trusting the word of a scumbag like him can only end in catastrophe for her. Meanwhile, Eve is having trouble sleeping because of the conversation she had with Mimori last night. She still believes Duke Zuon will honor their agreement, but she can't shake the feelings of doubt she has. So she decides to go to the Duke's office to confirm that he will really let her go after she wins her final match. As she approaches the Duke's office, she hears him and his advisor talking about the final match tomorrow and how the spectators are going to miss Eve. But of course he plans to have her die in that match because it would be good for publicity. Eve is shocked to hear that the Duke seriously planned to betray her, but the Duke goes on to say that he has always thought of Eve as nothing more than a wild beast that became profitable. Now that she's no longer going to be useful to him, he plans to have the next champion skin her alive and wear her pelt around as a new gimmick. The advisor asks what the Duke is going to do about the dark elf girl Eve was working so hard to take care of, and he suggests that it might be a good idea to grant her freedom as a goodwill gesture since Eve kept fighting for an additional 2 years for the dark elf's sake. Duke Zuon says he was actually thinking of taking the dark elf girl in, and his advisor is surprised that the Duke is actually showing compassion for once, but the Duke didn't say no, did he? He's only planning on taking her in because he has a young elf fetish, and once he's done with her, he will just sell the girl off to the nearest brothel. Eve now knows that Mimori was right, and there really is no chance of being freed if she trusts the Duke, so she heads to the bridge to see if she can still take Mimori up on his deal. She soon arrives at the bridge, hoping that Mimori and Saras haven't left yet, and thankfully, they were still there waiting for her. Mimori asks if this means Eve wishes to accept his offer, and Eve confirms it as everything he said about the Duke betraying her was true. She still has some terms to discuss about their journey to the land of monsters, but she intends to tell Mimori where the witch lives. In that case, Mimori is satisfied and the only thing left to do is to get the elf girl. Meanwhile, the elf girl is being put to work in the tavern, but the cruel owner comes in to start yelling at her for being so slow and useless. The elf girl tries to ignore it and keep working. Unfortunately, the owner smacks the girl until she falls to the floor in tears. The only thing that still keeps her going at this point is the promise that Eve made to free her. The owner is a failure, so she sees nothing wrong with taking down all her pent-up frustration on the girl. She even starts screaming into the girl's ears just to torture her. But a few moments later, Eve busts into the room and confronts the owner. Eve knew the elf girl was being abused here, but she had no idea it had gotten this bad, so she is prepared to kill the owner for all the suffering she has put the elf girl through. But the owner begins begging for her life and says it was Duke Zuon that ordered her to treat Liz so harshly. Eve still can't stand the owner, but she decides not to kill her after all. Eve takes Liz's hand and tells her that the situation has changed, so they need to leave the city immediately. Liz says she is willing to go anywhere with Eve, so Eve turns to the owner and tells her that as long as she tells the Duke she doesn't know what happened to Liz, then she will be spared. The owner begins groveling and swears that she will do everything Eve instructed her to do, and she starts apologizing to Liz, saying she regrets all the torment she caused Liz to go through, and she even starts crying on cue to really sell the apology. Liz obviously doesn't believe her, but Liz isn't the type to go for revenge, so she just lets it go and turns to leave with Eve. But as they are leaving, someone who is totally fine with revenge walks in. So Mimori tells Eve and Liz to go on ahead because he has some business to take care of. Once Mimori confronts the owner, he tells her to drop the act because he knows what kind of person she is. The woman begins acting smug and says it'll be over for Mimori and the others as soon as she tells the Duke what they've done. Unfortunately, Mimori doesn't really care, he just wants to make sure scum like her doesn't get to see another sunrise after all the horrible things she has done to Liz. He casts paralysis and poison on her, but to avoid suspicion, he decides to make it look like a robbery and stab the woman to death. After he is done, Mimori heads back outside and goes into the sewers to meet up with Eve and the others. Eve asks Mimori what he did to the woman and he doesn't give a clear answer, but he says the woman won't be able to bother Liz ever again. As she said earlier, Eve will tell Mimori where to find the Witch of Taboos, but before she does, she would like to know why he wants to meet the witch in the first place. Mimori explains that he has a forbidden scroll written in ancient text, and he heard that the Witch of Taboos might be able to read it. Eve just wants to confirm that Mimori doesn't intend to harm the witch in any way, so he assures her that he won't start anything as long as the witch doesn't attack him. Eve is glad to hear this and says there is something else she wants to discuss with him. She isn't as smart as him and can't predict people's actions like Mimori can, so she would like to swear her loyalty to him as her master. Mimori is surprised by this sudden leap in trust when she still barely knows him, but Eve has realized that she can't solely base her trust on how long she has known someone. Besides, she knows for a fact that Mimori is a good person because he could have used any number of violent tactics to force Eve to tell him where the witch lives. He even had the option of holding Liz hostage, yet he chose to save her instead. The group begins their journey, but before they can escape, the Duke has already sent out a search party to capture Eve and Liz. The Duke likely enlisted the help of the Ashint cult in the hunt, as Mimori has to come up with a strategy to beat them, so he tells Eve to take Liz and hide deep in the forest while he and Sarah's handle the Ashint cult. The cult enters the forest and spots some tracks, but the leader realizes that the tracks are too obvious, so it must be some kind of trap. He yells for the person behind this to show themselves, so Sarah's emerges from the forest with a mask on to confront them. The leader doesn't know who Sarah's is, but he's in a good mood today, so he offers her a simple deal. As long as Sarah's hands over Eve and Liz, he won't unleash the full power of the Ashint cult on her, and he claims that their power was able to take down the world's strongest human civet. In addition, he is even willing to allow Sarah's to join the ranks of the Ashint cult since he can tell that she is a skilled martial artist. Surprisingly, Sarah's agrees to his terms and says she will lead them to Eve and Liz, but the leader knows that no one ever switches sides that quickly, so Sarah's must be trying to lead them into a trap. The fact that she is trying to lead them into the forest means she must need them to be within a certain range for some sort of attack, so he tells his men to aim their bows at her and get ready to attack. She asks why they are using bows when they claim to have powerful curses, and since he intends to kill her anyway, the leader lets her in on a little secret. The Ashint cult was formed after the Assassin's Guild was exterminated by a summoned hero, and the cult just uses assassination techniques to eliminate targets, with a little bit of added poison of course. The poison is incredibly advanced and leaves no traces, so the cult is able to pass it off as a curse to the unsuspecting masses. Furthermore, the fact that the cause of Civet's death was unknown presented the perfect opportunity for the Ashint cult to gain popularity by stealing credit for the job, and the best part is that no one can ever prove that they weren't the ones who killed Civet, so they'll never be caught. Sarah's asks why they are doing all this, so the leader tells her that they plan to use Duke Zuon to carve out a central role for themselves in this nation, while also assassinating anyone who gets in their way. And speaking of people who are getting in their way, the leader asks where Sarah's allies are hiding, but she says she is the only one here to face them. The leader finds it hard to believe that she came out here intending to defeat them all by herself, but Sarah says she is confident in her ability and reveals her identity as the one who survived being hunted by Civet. It makes a lot of sense to the leader why she would be confident in her abilities, but he still doesn't believe that Sarah's could have defeated Civet. He calls out one of his subordinates named Belbar and tells Sarah's that this guy is the one who was meant to kill Eve in tomorrow's battle. And his younger brother Varigan is here as well, so together, these two are the strongest members of the Ashint group. Coincidentally, they also had a younger brother named Zeresh, but he was killed while chasing after Sarah's, so the brothers have a personal grudge against her. Additionally, while she was distracted, the leader has already had some of the other members of the Ashint cult circle around to cut off her escape route. Now there's no chance that she will be able to escape, so the leader tells her to give up now and submit to him, otherwise she will be killed by the poison. Sarah's does as she is told and kneels before the leader, but just when he thought he had won, Mimori uses his special move to extend his range and paralyze all the members of the cult. He also already took care of all the cult members that were trying to flank them, so no one is coming to save the leader. Mimori intentionally made their tracks obvious to make the leader suspicious of Sarah's, and once he felt like he had all the power, he let his guard down, and that's when Mimori struck. Everything went exactly as Mimori planned, so Mimori asks her to go back and inform Eve and Liz that the Ashint have been taken care of. Once Sarah's is gone, Mimori spots the first group in the process of retreating, so he wants to take them out and asks Piggymaru to connect with him again. Unfortunately, after all the strain he's been under, Piggymaru doesn't have the strength to transform anymore. Since Piggymaru can't help him, Eve offers to lend him her assistance in taking out the remaining bounty hunters. In the meantime, Sarah's takes Liz deeper into the forest to keep her safe until the hunters have been dealt with. Mimori asks Eve if she can get an accurate estimation of the number of assailants they'll be facing, and once she's figured out their number and distance, she and Mimori wait for them to arrive. The bounty hunters soon spot Eve, and they intend to capture and drag her to the Duke's feet, but just before they can attack her, Mimori paralyzes and poisons all the soldiers present, leaving them frozen in place. Just then, the Duke and his advisor show up on horses behind Eve and Mimori, and the Duke believes he has Eve cornered, so he intends to personally kill her for having the gall to not want to die. On top of that, he will skin Eve alive and make a pair of underwear out of her hide just to be disrespectful. Mimori is sick of hearing the Duke's rambling and attempts to use Paralyze to take him down, but he is shocked when he receives an error message that says he has exceeded the number of targets for Paralyze, so he can't use that ability right now. And that means he's going to have to get creative, so he uses his darkness spell to blind the advisor, leaving him wide open for Eve to slash him in two. Mimori continues doing the same thing with the rest of the soldiers, and Eve cuts them down accordingly, but a few of the soldiers are smart enough to realize they stand no chance, so they start running away. Mimori tells Eve that she can't let any of them survive, so Eve grabs a spear and throws it to take out one of the fleeing soldiers. A couple of paralyzed slots have been freed up now that some soldiers have died, so Mimori is almost ready to finish things off. But in the meantime, Ceres is here to keep him safe. The Duke is throwing a tantrum over the fact that his soldiers aren't capable of killing a single man, and Eve thanks Mimori because she never could have gotten the opportunity to have her revenge without him. She runs out and quickly slaughters the rest of the Duke's soldiers, and now that the Duke has no men left, he yells that he will make Eve pay for this and turns to go home, but we all know Mimori wasn't going to let him leave here alive. Eve approaches the Duke, and honestly, if he had only intended to betray her, then she might have forgiven him, but for going after Liz, Eve has no mercy to give and slashes his head off. Now that everything is over, Mimori asks Ceres to take Liz and get ready to leave soon, but he has one more thing he needs to take care of. He walks over to one of the dead bodies and uses his freeze ability, and when used on a corpse, it creates a layer of ice that can be shattered to completely disintegrate the body. This way, Mimori can eliminate all traces of the Ashint from the world, and no one will ever know what happened here. A while later, the news of the Ashint cult's disappearance reaches the king, and he is in a state of panic because he had intended to use the Ashint as pawns to accomplish his goals. But now that they are gone, how is he going to explain this to the goddess? He can afford to find out what Vicious will do to him once she finds out, so he orders his men to locate the Ashint cult as soon as possible. Back with Mimori's group, Liz and Eve have both gone to sleep already, so Ceres offers to keep watch while Mimori gets some sleep as well. Mimori says he doesn't feel like sleeping anytime soon, so Ceres offers to let him rest on her lap until he feels like sleeping. And he appreciates the offer, but Ceres looks pretty tired, so if anything, he would like to offer his lap for her to sleep in. Ceres didn't think twice about taking him up on his offer, so she lays down on his lap, only to realize that Mimori might have been joking when he made the offer. It gets a little awkward after that, but since it can't possibly get any more awkward, Mimori asks if he can touch Ceres' elf ears. Ceres is caught off guard, but she allows it, so Mimori gets to feel her ears. After that's done, the two of them decide to stay up, and Ceres asks Mimori if he has any special feelings towards Eve or Liz, because he is far more gentle with them than he would be with any other people. Mimori explains that it's for the same reason that he likes Ceres so much they remind him of people whom he wants to protect. Eve reminds him of his uncle, and Liz is the same way Mimori used to be when he was younger. They were both abused by the people in charge of them, and the only difference is that Liz is still kind enough to forgive those who hurt her, while Mimori has no problem killing anyone who threatens him, and he doesn't intend to change the way he does things. He tells Ceres that she is free to leave him if she ever gets tired of the life of vengeance he leads, but Ceres doesn't intend to leave him for any reason. Mimori is happy to hear that she will support him, so he tells her that he will fulfill any one request of hers to the best of his ability. So when she has decided what she wants, she can ask him, but for now he tells her she should get some sleep. Meanwhile, over in Allium, Sugu is receiving some swordsmanship training down in the prison, and her instructor praises her because she has been improving a lot since they started training together. But she reminds Sugu that she can't tell anyone about their training sessions because Vicious is so petty that she would probably forbid Nyan from training Sogu any longer. Sogu asks Nyan why she agreed to help her train when she doesn't get anything in return, so Nyan explains that she took a liking to Sogu because she looks a lot like Nyan's sister. And before she leaves, she reminds Sogu that this world is incredibly ruthless, so she can't show any weakness if she wants to survive. The next morning, Mimori's group is preparing to set out on their journey to the land of monsters, and Mimori has bought a new dress for Liz to wear, and she absolutely loves it. Before they leave, Ceres suggests that should come up with a name for their group since they might need to identify themselves once they get to the land of monsters. She already has a name in mind and suggests that they could call themselves the Lord of Flies Warband, and everyone seems to like the name, so Mimori agrees to go with that. After a lot of off-screen traveling, the group eventually arrives in the land of monsters, and Mimori notices a giant dead tree in the distance, so Ceres explains that the tree is called the Corrupted Tree, although it used to be a sacred tree. Eve asks Mimori to pour some magic into her hand, so he does, and Eve is able to pull up a magic map which was passed down to her people. It will allow them to locate the witch, so they begin the long trek to the witch's home. By nightfall, they set up camp, and Mimori stares off into the distance while thinking about his motivations. He may be a fool to be so set on vengeance, but he still feels nothing but burning hatred towards Vicious and the others who abandoned him. And he will annihilate any monsters he comes across to gain XP and become strong enough to get his revenge. The next morning in Alien, Vicious congratulates the heroes on leveling up, but they still lack techniques, so she has gone through the effort of gathering several famous figures to act as their instructors. Vicious tells them that the Demon Empire is definitely making a huge move soon, so she wants the heroes to participate in the battle against them. And to make sure they are ready by then, she plans to send the heroes to the land of the golden-eyed monsters to train. As Mimori's group makes their way through the land of monsters, Liz offers to carry the majority of the luggage because she wants to help everyone out. The others tell her she doesn't need to carry it all by herself, but since she seems really determined to help, they respect her wishes and let her carry the bags. They continue through the forest and they suddenly sense something coming, so Mimori and the others stop and take their battle stances. A monster soon appears before them, and Mimori thinks it looks pretty similar to one of the lizard monsters he had to face back in the ruins of Disposal, with the only difference being that it has a seaweed head. Regardless of its nature, their plan of attack remains the same, so Eve engages with the monster in order to keep it distracted. And once Mimori is able to get within range, he uses Paralyze and Poison to take it out. Eve asks if Mimori achieved what he wanted, and Mimori says he is satisfied because he needed to make sure his Paralyze and Poison abilities still work on the monsters here. After facing one of the monsters here personally, Mimori can say with certainty that these monsters are inferior to the ones he had to face in the ruins of Disposal. And if this is the worst this place has to offer, then getting to the witch isn't going to be a problem. Mimori begins dissecting the monster, which seems a bit odd, so Saris asks him what he's doing, and he explains that he has seen this monster in the Forbidden Book before, and parts of it can apparently be used to make a forbidden item. The item is something like a voice modulator, and Mimori thinks it could come in handy, so he wants to make one. He sees that Saris seems interested in the information from his Forbidden Book, so he tells her she can keep it for the meantime if she wants because he trusts her with it. Once Mimori is done collecting his materials, the group keeps moving until they come across a large body of water. Eve and Mimori are the first to cross, and Liz wants to go next, so Saris warns her to be careful not to slip on the stones. Eve thinks it would be better to just carry Liz across since she is still just a child, but Mimori thinks it's better to let Liz do things on her own from time to time. Liz agrees because it's not like she's going to fall over. However, a moment later she indeed falls over and nearly ends up in the water, but Mimori sends Piggymaru out to save her before that happens. Even though she ended up failing, Mimori believes that what's important is that Liz has the confidence to try things by herself. Once Liz finally makes it over to the other side, she notices that Mimori and Eve are talking about something and she thinks they might be making fun of her for almost falling into the river. Eve doesn't want Liz to feel self-conscious, so she makes up a lie and says they were actually talking about the kind of kids Mimori and Saris are going to have. As she says this, Saris overhears her and loses focus, causing her to fall into the river. Once they finally get her out of the river, Saris apologizes for letting herself get distracted like that, and she doesn't want to delay the group, so she tells Mimori they don't need to wait for her clothes to dry out. Mimori agrees to keep moving, but he wants to give Saris his coat so she doesn't end up catching a cold, and Saris is grateful for his offer. The group then continues making their way through the forest, but before long, Mimori and Eve sense something up ahead, so they tell Liz to get behind them as they prepare for battle. Eve tells Mimori that she recognizes these monsters, and she knows for a fact that she can't beat them, so she asks Mimori what they should do. Mimori tells her that she should sit this one out and let him handle it on his own, so he hides behind a tree and waits for the monsters to enter his effective range. As the monsters come into view, Mimori can understand why Eve would stand no chance at defeating these things, because almost no one could beat them in a regular fight. However, Mimori doesn't intend to have a normal fight, so as soon as the monsters get close enough, he paralyzes them and then uses Berserk to make them bleed all over the place until they die. Once the monsters die, Mimori notices that he leveled up again, but that's not important to him right now because he wants to start harvesting materials from the nose arts. Eve looks at Mimori in disgust and asks if he intends to eat that thing, but Saris interjects and explains that Mimori doesn't intend to eat the monster. He is just collecting the materials because it's an ingredient in a forbidden item which will make Piggymaru stronger. Although Piggymaru is going to have to eat it, and it's not going to be a fun time for him. Just then, Mimori and the others sense a monster nearby, but they can't pinpoint its location because no malice or hostility is being directed at them. After looking around for a bit, Piggymaru tells Mimori that the monster is inside his backpack, so Mimori opens it up and takes out the egg he has been carrying. It looks like it's about ready to hatch, and a few moments later, it does exactly that, giving rise to a horse monster of some sort. None of them have any idea what it is since they've never seen anything like it before. While petting the horse, Mimori feels something odd on its back, so he pulls back the horse's hair and finds a magical organ there. Ceres explains that most monsters have an organ like this for absorbing magic, so Mimori comes up with an idea. He begins pouring his mana into the horse in hopes that it will grow bigger, and as he pours around 1,000 mana points in, the horse transforms into a magnificent black steed. This would be perfect for luggage hauling, but the horse says Mimori should keep pouring magic into it, and Mimori's got nothing to lose, so he pours 10,000 mana points in, and this time the horse transforms into a buff minotaur. Mimori is pleased with what he sees, so he decides to have the horse join their group, and as such they need to give it a name. He thinks about it for a second and comes up with the name Slay, and Slay seems to really like it, so that becomes his official name. Elsewhere in the forest, Soku's group is busy apologizing to her because they've been nothing but dead weight this entire time. In contrast, Asagi's group has been doing pretty well since all of the team members are pulling their weight and working well together. The same goes for Takuju's group, but he isn't really satisfied with the progress they've been making so far because the fighters that are in charge of them have been taking care of all the really dangerous monsters because they think the heroes aren't ready to handle it, and Takuju hates being underestimated. Later that night, the fighters take the heroes hunting again, but they come across an area with a group of Nozarts up ahead, and they don't think the heroes are ready to handle something like this, so they ask the heroes to stand back while they handle it themselves. Takuju doesn't like being told to wait, but as the monsters approach, Mayan says she will handle the one on the right, while 2 other fighters can handle the one on the left. They begin their attack, and the Nozarts get diced up very quickly, but there are a lot more where those came from, so the fighters might need to come up with a new strategy to defeat them all. However, Takuju has already had enough of being underestimated, so he walks up to the front lines and uses his Dragonic Burst attack to incinerate all the Nozarts in one go. He then announces that his ability is only at level 4, yet he has the power to cause this much destruction. So no one has the right to underestimate him, for he is the future ruler of this world. The other heroes are in awe of Takuju's power, so much so that they barely realize that Hijiri and Itsuki aren't here anymore. The 2 of them are elsewhere in the forest, and they came here to deal with some spies that had been following the group, but the second the spies were captured, they offed themselves so they couldn't be interrogated. While all that is going on, Mimori and the others have settled into an old building so they can spend the night. They've been making a lot of progress thanks to Slee, so it looks like they will arrive at the witch's house much sooner than they had expected. Ceres asks what Mimori came out here to look at, so he explains that he saw some lights coming from the forest, so he thought some monsters might be fighting down there. Ceres points out that the light is coming from the northeast, and Mimori realizes that that's the direction of Alian, so whatever is going on down there must have something to do with the goddess. The next morning, even Ceres wake up to find that Mimori isn't here anymore. Eve isn't particularly worried because she knows Mimori isn't the type of person to abandon them in the middle of the land of monsters. Ceres agrees with her, so they head outside to go looking for Mimori, and they don't have to look for long as Mimori is sitting outside the building after having killed a massive monster. Once Mimori notices them standing behind him, he greets the 2 and tells them that he had sensed a monster nearby earlier, so he came out to take care of it, and now he's looking through the monster's body parts to see if there's anything useful in here. After Mimori is done, the group continues their journey, but they eventually come across a vertical cliff, and they have no way of climbing it, so they are going to have to follow the road along the cliff instead. Ceres suggests that Mimori should take a break since he hasn't gotten any proper rest in a while, but Mimori says they need to keep moving because the air is becoming humid, and he would like to get as far as possible before it starts raining. As they walk along the road, they find it odd that they haven't come across any monsters for a while now, but they just assume it must be because they are getting close to the home of the Witch of Taboos. Mimori notices that Liz looks a little upset, so he asks her if she's scared of the land of monsters. Liz tells him that this place is definitely scary, but she hasn't felt much fear since they got here. And it's all because Ceres assured her that as long as Mimori is alive, they will never lose to any monsters here. Eventually, they make it to an opening in the cliff, and once they pass through, they'll be really close to the witch's home. Before they head through, Eve once again wants to thank Mimori for all the help he has given since there's no way they would have been able to make it this far without him. Mimori tells her there's no need to be so thankful since he mainly helped her to benefit himself anyway. Eve says she will be happy with anything as long as she and Liz are able to live a quiet life together. Maybe they could even start a farm together once they settle into their new lives, and Liz likes that idea, but a moment later, a mouthed monster appears above Eve, and it's too close for Mimori to use Paralyze in time, so Eve turns around and slashes it down. The monster is definitely dead now, but Mimori still has a bad feeling about it for some reason. His worries are confirmed when the monster lets out an ear-piercing screech and a flash of blinding light which acts as a signal and alerts all the monsters in the area of the group's location. So now, every monster in the forest is heading straight for Mimori's group. Their chances of survival aren't looking good against this many enemies. Mimori tells the others to start moving since they have some time before the monsters reach here, but Eve doesn't think they'll be able to escape in time, so she offers to stay behind and act as bait while the others run away. Liz tries to talk Eve out of it, but Eve says she needs to do this since it was her actions that caused this mess. She asks Liz to listen to Sarah's and Mimori while she's gone, but Mimori never agreed to this plan of hers. He says he will only let Eve act as bait if she promises to come back alive, and Eve promises, but she didn't say on God, so Mimori knows she doesn't intend to survive. He tells her that she doesn't need to feel responsible for this since the monster that sounded the alert was hidden with concealment magic, so it was impossible to detect ahead of time, and it was the right call to kill it when she did. Besides, if any blame is going to be dished out, he says it should be directed at him since he failed to cast sleep on the monster before it attacked. In any case, Eve is an indispensable asset to the team since she is the only one who has a map to the witch's location, and negotiations will go a lot smoother if she is there with him when he meets the witch. Mimori then pulls out the voice projection stone he made earlier and sticks it in his helmet before telling the others that he's the only one who stands a chance of surviving against that horde as long as he has the help of Piggymaru and Slay. He's the only one here who can deal guaranteed fatal damage to the monsters anyway, so he tells Eve that she doesn't have to worry herself over it. Liz thanks Mimori, but he tells her that it's too early to be thanking him since he can't guarantee that he will make it back alive either, although he's going to try his best. Sarah kneels to wish Mimori good luck, and he entrusts her with taking care of Eve and Liz if he ends up dying to the horde out there. Meanwhile, all the heroes are being evacuated because they are not prepared to handle a catastrophe of this scale. Soka tries to gather up all her team members so they don't get caught in the stampede, but they all get scared and start running off in random directions. Meanwhile, Oyamada and Takutu are trying to fight a bunch of the monsters, but they soon realize that the monsters are going after something else, and the fact that he is being ignored by the monsters pisses him off immensely. One of the girls is running for her life when she accidentally trips over a rock and is about to be caught by the Hanzi monster, but before she could be harmed, Kobata steps in to defend her. The girl thanks Kobata and runs away, leaving Kobata to fight the monster alone. Kobata steals her resolve and reminds herself that she needs to stay strong so none of her classmates end up dying, but then she remembers that she stood by and did nothing as Mimori disposed of, so she has no right to be acting all high and mighty. At the same time, Mimori is just about ready to put his plan into motion. He ordered Sarah's and the others to go hide themselves in a nearby cave so they don't get caught up in the chaos, and that means there's no reason for him to hold back. Mimori proceeds to pour his magic into Slay's stone, and a bolt of red lightning can be seen all the way across the forest. Now that Slay is transformed, Mimori takes out his helmet and activates the voice projection stone before asking Piggymaru to do the honors of starting the battle. Right on cue, Piggymaru yells into the helmet, and his voice is amplified hundreds of times over, leading all the monsters directly to Mimori's location. Mimori is glad the monsters fell for the bait, so he puts on his helmet and prepares himself for a high-speed chase. On Mimori's signal, Slay begins running, and Mimori still isn't certain that he will be able to make it out of this alive, but he has a lot to protect right now, so he can't afford to let his worries show. Back at the heroes' camp, Soba meets back up with Yasu's group, but she is horrified to find out that 2 of his group members have died. She doesn't understand how this could have happened since Yasu should have been strong enough to keep them safe, but Yasu just didn't care about them at all and ran to save himself. Sobu is upset and asks why Yasu chose not to do anything to help them even though he's A-class, but again, Yasu just didn't give a shit about them, and the fact that Sogu is giving him a lecture on morals is really pissing him off right now. He knows she's not trying to be condescending, but the way she always talks makes her sound like she's acting all high and mighty. Sobu doesn't understand what he's talking about since all she was saying was that the strong should protect the weak, but that's exactly what Yasu is talking about. The law of this world is strength, and Yasu survived because he is strong, but the other 2 that died weren't even good people in the first place, so why would he care about them? Those 2 were among the first to mock Mimori as he was banished to his doom for being weak, so they can't complain now that the same happened to them. Not to mention the fact that they relentlessly bullied him back on Earth. Takudo comes back over to the group just so he can insult Yasu and call him a nobody. It's clear from Yasu's reaction that he is still having a hard time coming to adjusting to the situation. So even if he may have some decent power right now, it won't be long before reality sets in and he is forced to bow down to Takuto's superiority. Yasu is enraged and activates his ability before telling Takuto that he shouldn't get the wrong idea and think he is superior just because he's S-class, because Yasu already figured out that your class isn't the only thing that determines your strength. For example, Sogu may be S rank, but she hasn't developed a unique ability yet. And on the other hand, someone like Asage, who is B rank, has surpassed Oyamada even though he is A rank. So Yasu believes that sooner or later he will become more powerful than Takuto and make him regret his words. Oyamada is about to attack Yasu out of anger, but Takuto stops him since he sees no point in starting a fight amongst themselves right now. And Yasu is actually right about rank not necessarily meaning strength, and he calls out Sogo for being the weak link of the S ranks, so he expects her to get her act together soon. In the meantime, he plans to do something to demonstrate his superiority so no one will have the gall to oppose him again. At the same time, while Ceres and the others are hiding in the cave, Eve says she wants to go out and look for Mimori all of a sudden. Ceres asks her why she wants to do that, so Eve explains that there are a lot of monsters out there, so even with his ability, it would be difficult for him to win against them all. On top of that, Mimori isn't in good condition since from the moment they set foot in the land of monsters, Mimori has gotten the lowest amount of sleep to make sure everyone else stayed well rested. His sacrifice is what allowed them to make it this far into the land of monsters, so she needs to do what she can to help him. She wasn't bluffing when she said she could outrun the monsters in this region earlier. She is well versed in traversing difficult terrain, especially since she has night vision, so she won't be caught by the monsters easily. On top of that, if Mimori and Slay happen to be injured, she's the only one who would be able to carry them to safety. Ceres agrees with Eve's reasoning and apologizes for questioning her, but since Mimori put her in charge, she had to make sure Eve wasn't taking unnecessary risks. She says she will allow Eve to go after Mimori, but only on the condition that she makes it back alive. Meanwhile, Mimori is trying to come up with a strategy to take down all the monsters, and while his ability won't be able to affect all of them at once, it will still get some of them, so he starts by casting Berserk on the monster and making them fight one another. It seems to have been effective, but only for a little while as the monsters soon resume their chase. Mimori then tries using Paralyze to slow them down, but that doesn't buy him much time either. His situation isn't looking too good right now, as the rain is causing low visibility, and on top of that, his MP is being burnt through really quickly because of his combination with Pigimaru, so if he wants to keep going, his only option would be to level up so he can restore his mana, and as long as he kills some of the high-level monsters, it should be possible, but a plan like that is too risky for him to rely on. If he's not within a certain range of a target when it dies, Mimori won't get any experience, so the only way for him to guarantee that he levels up is to circle back and attack directly. He asks Pigimaru and Slay if they are alright with his plan, and they seem to be fine with it, so Mimori turns around and charges straight into the horde of monsters. He is running low on MP, so he begins spamming Darkness and Paralyze to stop the monsters in their tracks, and with all of them immobilized, he tracks down the monster with the highest level and casts Berserk on it, so it suffers paralysis damage. Just as Mimori was about to run out of mana, the monster finally dies and he levels up, so his mana supply is replenished. He now has a guaranteed method of replenishing his mana, so he can keep fighting almost indefinitely. He then proceeds to cast Paralyze and Berserk on all the monsters in the vicinity and starts running away again, but as he does, he notices two more high-level monsters chasing him. So if he wants to take them out, then he is going to have to get behind them somehow. He uses Pigimaru to cast Sleep on the monsters, and by the time they get back up and try to start chasing again, Mimori has snuck up from behind and takes them out. With those two dead, he once again levels up, so he gets back on Slay's back and rides off to stay ahead of the horde. But unexpectedly, a second horde of monsters appears in front of him, so even though he tries defeating them ahead of time, Mimori ends up getting knocked off Slay's back and is forced to continuously spam every effect in his arsenal, so he doesn't get overrun by the monster. Meanwhile, Kobata is busy having a panic attack in the forest over the fact that she is just as bad as everyone else. She wanted to try and be kind to others, but when Mimori was thrown to the side, all she could do was stand by and watch it happen. Just then, Kobata looks up and notices Eve standing nearby, and from her perspective, a giant tiger she has never met before is staring her down, so she gets really scared. Eve is surprised to find a human out in these forests because no normal people ever come here, so she approaches Kobata to get a better look, and that's when she notices that Kobata reminds her a lot of Liz. She doesn't intend to harm her, but that's not what it looks like to Itsuki, so she rushes in and nearly slashes Eve with her lightning sword. Eve is able to react in time, but she gets frozen in place by Itsuki's lightning attack. Itsuki doesn't really care about Kobata, but her sister doesn't want to let Kobata die yet, so it's her job to rescue her right now, and she's going to have to kill Eve because she's a threat. This was the end of episode 11. Subscribe to not miss the next part.